Well, it's funny. I think about kind of the old world. We're talking, like ancient Near East, kind of the idea of what it means to exist. In our world, we tend to think in material terms. Existence is matter. It's being here in a body. Versus in the old world, existence was more about purpose and meaning. And it was a word that defined how you felt. And when you hear people say, well, I just don't feel seen or valued or respected, what they're really saying is they're in hell. They're somehow functioning in a way where they don't feel they exist. And so it's more of recognizing the value of place and functioning in some environment where you feel valuable and you're contributing, and then immediately you all of a sudden don't feel invisible. Or if somebody says that I feel invisible, they're really saying that I just don't have any meaning. I don't have feel like I have any purpose. They get into this kind of nihilistic cycle of abuse. And I mean, as a practitioner who's putting needles in somebody, somebody's putting a lot of trust in you, and they're, at least initially they're afraid because they don't know what this is going to feel like, and they're kind of by faith buying into the wider vision of the practice and what it's doing. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what sales is like, is you're trying to poke and massage um, in the right way, because you don't want to manipulate. You don't want to like feel like you're manipulating people, and that's a tough place to negotiate, both with yourself because you want to feel authentic, but also with the person. I mean, you know how it feels when somebody seems to be maybe I don't cheesy or very salesy, and we all have that kind of resistance to that kind of vibe. But yeah, yeah, and when you're doing this, what damn good. I mean,
Yeah,
I can't see the inside of what's going on. I see your posts, and I'm like, oh, okay, go, Jeremy.
yeah.
Like,
It's wild what we're doing. It is wild.
yeah,
It's really, really satisfying. Yeah. So, all right. So with sales stuff, how I've been kind of taking this apart is that I see incentives, and the trouble is if if you're selling something and your incentive is misaligned to the person you're selling it to, then that's going to be the recipe for resentment and, not being able to sleep well at night, basically. So what I mean by that is, like, a lot of people in sales training, and there's a ton of them now, especially online, a lot of these, like, coach consulting kind of guys, all this sales stuff, they're all over the place. But they're optimized around getting the yes and getting the payment to come across. They're optimized on getting a credit card swipe, you know, but they're not optimized on back end delivery, fulfillment, long term relationships, and that kind of thing.
yeah,
So, what I've noticed and started to kind of craft a whole world around paying more attention to this is that we don't have to be scared of sales. If you're somebody with a lot of integrity, you just need to step up and align yourself to that long-term working relationship, and then the sale part becomes no problem, because it's not about getting somebody to say yes or convincing them. It's about helping them figure out what it even is they want, helping them see what it is you can see about what you do or what you offer, and then respectfully letting them make an educated decision, right? But if we shrink
yeah.
away from that whole thing, then we never go that extra mile to clear up miscommunications or find out more what they're looking for. And that's, I think, kind of the sad part for a lot of, like, the folks in my industry. We have so much to offer, and there's so much tail tucking going on because nobody wants to seem like a sleazy salesperson. So we don't lead the conversation, and we don't explore and find out the blind spots or the misperceptions.
Yeah. Well, and so is the context that I mean, what's the context here? Or is this the sales where practitioners are trying to reach out and they're sort of cold calling or trying to approach businesses, or
No.
do they have a captive
No.
audience, like somebody's already seeking out their
Yeah. Yeah.
services?
We're looking at, yeah, in sales parlance, it'd be a warm lead or a hot lead, somebody who's called you for
Yeah.
a consultation and all that. But I mean, there's so much to this. But one of the reasons why I really like your take on this is you seem very naturally aligned to long term, like, customer satisfaction. So I remember being in your wood shop, which I know you told me isn't a wood shop, but it looks like a wood shop and it smells like a wood shop. And you told me that one of the things you try to prevent is buyer's remorse.
I raised 7 kids, so like every time I had to buy something, there was this part of me that would emerge that was super cheap and trying to be economical and thrifty. But then there's another part of me at work who values quality, who wants and pays attention to what I wear and how it looks and what it says about who I am. And you have this sort of this war being waged between these two sensibilities where you're trying to be economically, reasonable and so there is two kinds of buyer's remorse. There's the every time you look at the thing that you bought, you're like, wow, that was expensive. That was too expensive. I shouldn't have done that. And you've devalued the purchase every time you experience whatever the item is. And then there's the other side of it, which I tended to be more towards as somebody raising a bunch of kids, which was um, I don't even use it or wear it because I don't really value it. And so maybe that's what you're referring to, which is you have to recognize that those two things are at play when you're making a decision. And I don't know if in your world with practitioners, does insurance typically cover acupuncture, or are these people opening their wallet with non-insured monies to use your services?
It can be both, depending on the practitioner and their business model. A lot of times, here's something interesting I'll tell you is this whole subsidizing thing where you've got a third party payer involved. It really changes the psychology of the interactions. And I talk about this stuff. I'm kind of direct with it, but really I don't mean to. It's not a judgment, right? I don't mean to offend anybody who like uses insurance to pay for healthcare. Like obviously that's what
Yeah,
you're going to do. If you have insurance, there are just different levels of solution. And I get a behind the scenes look because not only I'm a practitioner, but I'm talking to all these colleagues all the time, and I'm asking them very pointed questions about like basically my goal is to help the other people in my field really thrive long term and not burn out, because every time a practitioner burns out, now there's like 1,000 people they're not going to help over the course of what could have been a happy career. And I know what
yeah,
that feels like too. I got out of the burnout, but I mean, I know it's just nasty. So I started to kind of reverse engineer the burnout. And one of the things I found was that basically a lot of unsatisfying clinical interactions can lead to burnout. And
yeah,
what that looks for people in my field anyway is that everybody wants to work with these like motivated, committed, sophisticated patients that are willing to change their lifestyle. They're willing to like commit to treatment. Yes, it's going to cost some money. Yes,
yeah.
there's going to be herbs they've got to take. They've got to maybe change their diet. Like people who are really willing to do what it takes to make a transformation, not just financially pushing their chips in, but intentionally with their intention, their attention, their awareness, pushing their chips in on like a whole healthier lifestyle. Because really the problems a lot of us solve are very gnarly, multifaceted, nonlinear problems, and there is no root cause. Like, oh, it's just your thyroid or what. It's not. Everything's interlinked. So when you want to make progress on these systems, you've got to be looking at multiple inputs, and a lot of that's going to rest on the patient. So, anyway, long story short, what I've been finding is that those kinds of clinical interactions tend to be less common when people are using insurance and things like that to subsidize the treatments. So, it's not a one to one. It's just one of these things where even MDs I've worked with, where basically the burnout track is really high because you've got people who aren't very financially invested, which doesn't mean they're not emotionally invested. It doesn't mean they won't do the work, right? But in general, if you start looking at the 80/20 of this thing, people are they're not really thinking a lot about the finances of it because it's just a little copay or whatever. And then the practitioner on the other side has to do hours of computer work just to get reimbursed a percentage of what they would have charged anyway,
Because
six
that's
weeks
what the
later.
insurance would pay.
Yeah.
Right.
So it kind of turns
Yeah.
into this
I guess
mess
the
where
only
you,
reason I brought that up is not to validate insurance, except that that's an obstacle to care. If clients are bringing that up, and then you're always feeling like you're having to sell them out of viewing insurance as I mean, that's what you just did right there to me. You opened my field of perception so that I could see that from the inside what you guys are having to deal with as people asking probably, well, do you take insurance? And then all of a sudden you're having to try to build out a context where they're valuing the care and the thing that they're really after above the $20 copay versus, and really you want a long-term relationship. not the
You
magic
know,
pill, right? You know,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, if I can give a magic pill that has lasting results, I will do that. If I can
sure.
just do one acupuncture point and it's going to change your life forever and you never need me again and you're out hiking and doing whatever, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
That's great. Most times it's not, that's not the reality. We don't have like the magic wand, so it is going to be a series of treatments and kind of
Yeah. Well, and
navigating
that's
herbs
not the
and things like.
approach typically of acupuncture or some other types of care versus the kind of modern medical, diagnose and medicate kind of model. Uh,
Well, we try to be aligned to reality, I mean, if you're
yeah.
going to teach your system to be stronger, it's just like training a dog. It takes time and you've got to give repeated stimulus so that, the dog knows how to go potty outside. You've got to like train your body how to
Yeah.
get back to what it knows. And a lot of times for patients, that means they need to start being aware of their inputs and what kind of stuff is going into their mouth and into their brain and, all these into their arm, like whatever they're getting put
Yeah.
into their body, they need to be aware of that stuff, which then you get into this whole thing of like, okay, there's a ton of education required. And now it's like you can't run a business where you're taking insurance copays and fighting with those companies and trying to see 10 or 20 people an hour to make it work and think you're going to deliver effective care, which includes
Makes
education,
makes sense. Yeah.
unless you can build some kind of like a fractal system of having an online component where people can come in and go through trainings and programs. So, I mean, I work with practitioners usually that want to get more involved in like a higher ticket package, like an annual membership for somebody who they can just commit. They buy once. That's what you say, like buy once, cry once, right? It's like you just deal with the money
Yeah.
one time, then you're in, and you can just like take care of the person. But that's not the only way to do it. Like we also have stuff where it's very low ticket memberships and things like that, but you just have to have the technology set up so that you can sustainably deliver all the information. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is it's not like people who pay with insurance are like bad patients or something like that. It's just that model is very difficult to navigate for a lot of clinicians, not all, but a lot of clinicians, and still be like happy about their work. So there's
Yeah.
different filters you can put on that. But
I
yeah, when
got
you
it.
got
I mean,
somebody coming
I
in,
get I get what you're I get what you're saying. I mean, it's such a weird world because from my vantage point as a small business owner who's on state care, I mean, the only reason that you and I had a relationship was because I had something that you valued, and we were able to make a sort of a non-customary exchange of services and goods. But it's, I mean,
I don't know
I
what you're
remember it's
talking about.
what's that? You don't know?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, is is this get us in trouble?
I
Uh,
don't recall.
you
Yeah.
don't recall?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's lots of ways to do it, and you don't have, like I say this, you don't have to take every nickel out of somebody, but it's like you just start looking at the different kind of leverage points of ultimately what you're optimized for, which is that kind of long-term, successful, happy relationship. I want people to think about the time they spent with me, no matter how much money they invested, but I want them to look back on that fondly, and it may be difficult, but I want them to look back and be like, man, I'm in a better place now. And for me, I've noticed one of the little things I look for is every now and then somebody will say, my life is radically different for having met you. And I'm like, okay, that's my feedback that I made a big change for this person, that I wasn't just a cog in a machine or something. And that's me. That's not everybody in my field. People have different things they're like optimized for, but I look at that as like a feedback that I made a big change. Things like that. So when that
Yeah.
happens, I don't get burned out. I get lit up. I'm like, all right, cool. This is great. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to talk to the next person because, you got to figure out these cases. It's like there's so many variables with the human body that it's your mental effort it's a real thing, even though it looks like just, a person sitting at a desk reading stuff. But it's like you're trying to figure out how am I going to not hurt this person? How am I going to help
Yeah.
them get better? How am I going to help them get better in a way where they can wean off of my treatment because their body's going to get stronger? How am I going to do this without creating much side effects? And if I do create side effects, what am I anticipating? What should I tell them ahead of time? Like there's so much stuff.
Well, and I mean, I mean, I'm not, I mean, I can imagine, even as you're saying that, I'm seeing all of these things that sort of emerge into the perceptual field, that you're having to consider. I mean, one, you're usually starting off and you really don't know somebody. So you're hearing their version of symptoms when you don't necessarily know the sources And so it takes time to work through that process. So you're trying to establish a relationship where you build trust so that you have some bridges that you both feel safe walking across. Um, but as a practitioner, your breadth of knowledge about the human body and anatomy and energy systems and all that stuff is um, so much more that, like, you're trying to get the deal, you're trying to initiate care, but you don't want it to be short term. You're up against a conventional Western medical paradigm that that is diversified and specialized and not holistic and addressing symptoms and not it's not holistic at all. So sometimes you have that whole perceptual field where you're trying to shift a desperate person who is not getting the attention and is never who's tired of masking their symptoms or medicating themselves. So I imagine it's the world we live in, and it's not just your field. It's the field where anybody is neurodivergent who has ideas that aren't mainstream and are just trying to navigate and not feel lost, like. But and so you have, yeah, I mean, I imagine that's overwhelming, and then everybody's got the pressure to make a living and to pay their bills and to pay their family. And I mean, in your case, I found it very easy to connect with you. um, but in the world of, I mean, I was in sales for a long time and doing sales training. there you definitely have different personality types, and it's sometimes it's a matter of, okay, how do you craft a story arc for um, somebody whose personality is different than yours? Because I would say you are naturally gifted at connecting and communicating and seeing this. And but a lot of people, like in my world, it's not that much different, because honestly, the reason this woodworking business succeeded was because I wasn't a woodworker and a typical artisan. My background was more in sales and communication and but the reason that most artisan businesses fail is because they're uncomfortable talking to people, they're uncomfortable asking for money. Honestly, they don't like talking to people. They just want to do their craft, and they have this sort of this patron view where I wish I could just make what I wanted and charge what I wanted. In the meantime, I also, most of my clientele is affluent, and sometimes I'm like, man, I like, there's this guy Charles Eisenstein I've read about the gift economy, and it's like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll just make these, and I won't charge, because I want a poor person to have one of these just as much as I want a wealthy person. But you're caught in this. I'm trying to pay the bills and feed my family, and it's just, um, it's hard to trust people. But anyway, I don't want to get down a rabbit hole there. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine as in your field that can be challenging. I wonder if it would just be helpful for somebody to have somebody to talk to about that. Like, I had a friend call me yesterday who's an artist in Alaska who will use some AI in generating portions of the art, but then she manipulates it. And she just had this woman just who had all this pent up frustration, and her whole idea about what art is just absolutely undo her as a human. And so we ended up talking for a while. And it can be tough to be a business owner, and I don't know, just sometimes having somebody to talk to or brainstorm with, or I mean, it's almost like they need a a a sales consultant. I hate that term because there's so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
associations with that. I mean, there's probably a better word. It's really just a communication practitioner. There are certain people who are good with ideas and words, and then there are certain people who just need to learn how to do that versus having that be an intrinsic part of what's natural to them. You know what I mean? Like, some people need sales training, or they just need to know
Yes. I would say
qualifying, or
everybody.
that basic
Everybody.
framework they need. But then you don't want it to feel sterile. Like, okay, I've got to go through the qualifying stage, so let me ask them what their needs are, and you feel like this robot. And it's like, that the customers can feel that too. So there's a way to kind of nuance that, and to relax into that kind of place with people. At
Well, I mean, the way to make it not sterile is to just care. I mean, you're still going to check the boxes of what needs to happen, but it's like you're interested and you care
But you're
about it. So
assuming that people in your field do care.
most
I
do.
mean, do they?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know, you know?
Yeah. Most do. That's why they
I
get their
would
hearts
think
broken.
so.
You
I
know?
would think so based on the, the field that they're choosing to operate, that they wanna help people.
Yeah.
But,
It's a very high
but some people
percentage.
do that, and it's because they just wanna feel better, you know what I mean?
Well, the
It
wounded
can be
physician is a
selfish.
strong, that's a strong
What
archetype. The
what's
wounded
that?
physician, the wounded physician, it's a
Yeah,
strong one. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the world in terms of most of us, our subconscious runs the show like 90, 95% of the time. And the
yeah,
subconscious is just very much interested in getting its own subconscious needs met constantly. Then, I mean, we project that onto every interaction we're having,
yeah.
which doesn't mean it's bad. Like, for example, we're having a conversation and I could tell you right now, like my subconscious is driving my urge to talk to you because I want to have my needs of connection, significance, contribution, growth. Like I want to have all these things met, so that
Yeah.
manifests as like, hey, Blake, let's set a time. It's not always bad, but a lot of times it's troubling when you aren't aware of your subconscious and how it's driving. So a lot of the practitioners, they maybe they have a martyr type complex where they feel like they're going to be more valued the more they suffer. So they'll just take on that extra case, that extra case, that extra case, and then they're not getting home until 10 p.m. because they were so busy at the clinic and then researching things. And everybody around them is like, you're working too hard. The family barely sees you. But inside their subconscious is like, yum, I'm suffering. Never going to change because it's below the surface. Right. So that's a lot of the stuff we got to look at is I try to say like being a clear lens or being a clear mirror so that we can see what's going on with our own self. And then when we go to talk to our patients and other people, we're not
Well,
projecting
and
on
so
them.
that's a whole nother thing, which is just people working on themselves. I can say that part of, I mean, when I approached you for care because of the complex PTSD, some of that came from, I mean, years of working with homeless people. And I mean, there's a diagnosable condition called compassion fatigue. But one of
Yeah.
the things that happened over time is I started to build up resentment because we live in this world that is enforced causality, you know, um, this sort of cause and effect. It's like, okay, well, here's my intentions. I've thought this out well. I'm going to, venture forward into this. And then the outcomes don't start looking like what they should based on your perceived trajectory of outcome. And that can be painful,
Yep.
and working with street people who are very manipulative and doing things for years and then just at some point you wanting to wring their neck, like, hey, dumbass, like, when are you going to put some skin in the game here? You're not doing anything. You're working the system, you're manipulating them, and you start to resent the people you're trying to care for because you're not getting the outcomes you want with them. And
That's
that's
it.
a real thing. But then it
That's the
also
burnout.
uncovers some of your own motivation, which is, okay, maybe I really don't love these people. This is about me. And I figured that out down the road far. That's part of where my burnout and my the effect on my own body was just like, okay, how much do I care, and on the other hand, how much did I just want things to turn out the way I wanted, so I felt better, like I was doing something good, and so it's real, man. It's it's a battle, and burnout is, that contributes to it as well, which is, or what are your motivations? Are they just financial? Do you really want to care for people? And and you're talking about how much people have to pour into what's going on in the background that the client doesn't see. And your practitioners, they probably need a care, whether it's talk therapy or another another practitioner, to because it's tough to be a business owner. It's not, you know and I would imagine in your world, are most of your practitioners, I mean, they're entrepreneurs as well, right? I mean, they're
Well, I
not
mean, that's,
in a
yeah, you
conventional
have a,
hospital or something, right?
well, here's the thing that I would kind of offer on that is that we're all entrepreneurs, even if we don't
Yeah,
know it. Especially if you're an employee, you're actually the worst kind of entrepreneur because you have to continually prove your worth to your employer. Just like
yeah,
entrepreneurs have to continually prove their worth to the market. But now your market is only one employer. So you've got a single point choke point of weakness. It's single point sensitive, right? If
yeah,
your one customer, your employer, doesn't like your performance, you're toast. If I have 100 patients and one of them doesn't like me, I'll just refer them out and I still got 99. So
yeah.
when we have an employer, we're single point sensitive. And so the illusion is that we're not entrepreneurs. We think we're safe, but really all the things that make an entrepreneur, like having to show up, solve problems, be creative, deliver value, communicate, all this kind of stuff. Employees have that too. They're just tricking themselves and thinking they don't have
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's
I
very
mean,
true.
everybody is a lot. To answer your question more directly, like a lot of acupuncturists do work for themselves. Like when I was coming up, I finished school in '09, and there really weren't a lot of jobs available because the field was still kind of nascent, it was growing. But
Yeah.
nowadays, there's a fair amount of jobs and things like that. So, a lot of practitioners do wind up being employees or working for bigger clinics, or they can work for hospitals, or even I consider, even if you own your own business but you take insurance, especially if you're networked in, you're essentially an employee of the insurance company without all the benefits. Because
Yeah.
now again, you've got to please this kind of third party who's dictating and doing basically doing the work for you. You'll probably like this. I think you can see how you could run this with your own business or any like pursuit, but I break down the anatomy and physiology of businesses, and I picked this up from a mentor years ago. But basically, if you just go, there's attraction that needs to happen. Like people have to be able to come find you somehow, and then there's
Yeah.
conversion, right? Which conversion is kind of an aggressive business term, but really it just means like education. They just need to
Yeah.
understand your market differentiation and if you can even help them with the problem, that kind of thing.
Sure. Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, so we got attraction, conversion. Then there's sales, which is basically like, here's what the offer looks like. Here's the contract. Here's my expectations of you if we work together. Here's your expectations of me. Here's what the money looks like. Here's the
Yeah.
timeline, all that kind of stuff. So attraction, conversion, sales, and then you've got your product on the end, which is all your fulfillment, whatever it is you're doing, your services, the actual, like for you, it might be a live edge desk, whatever it is you're making or
Yeah.
providing. Could be consulting, like they're on Zoom calls telling somebody what they should be doing for their health, whatever it is. That's your back end, your actual delivery. So if you look at those four pieces, attraction, conversion, selling, and product, most people, like you're talking about, who are artists, they're very interested in that last piece. It's the product. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I want to make this, I want to do this AI artwork the way I want to do it. I want to build this table this way. I want to do my complex cases and think of these cool herb formulas and all that. And those people, if you want to just live there, you're going to have, there's atrophied skill sets in the other three areas because you don't know how to get new clients or patients. You don't know how to educate them. You don't have any kind of sales process. You do great as an employee for somebody else who can do all that for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Insurance, if you take insurance, that kind of handles the attraction part because you're just on a list. They find you that way,
Yeah.
right? And then the conversion part is pretty much done because it's like, I'm the guy on the list. That's my market differentiator, right? It's a low price differentiator. I'll take your insurance. And then the sales part's done because they have to pay you like $5 copay and their insurance handles all that. So working with insurance is a lot like working for an employer because it helps you build up your one skill set of delivering your product, even though it's at the expense of never having to consider those other things. But then what happens is a lot of practitioners will start to resent that situation. They're like, oh, I'm so sick of insurance. Or I work at this other clinic and I have no control over things. I'm so sick of working for this employer. And how do I do my own thing? And the first thing I say is, look, your past self accepted that relationship for a reason because
Yeah.
it was symbiotic in some way. You've got deficiencies across the board here, and that thing's been filling them for you. So before you cut ties with insurance, you need to learn how to find new patients. You need to learn
Yeah.
how to fucking talk to them. You need to learn how to
Yeah.
do sales,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Build those up, and then you outgrow the shell of the thing you're under, and now you can be free of
Yeah,
it.
and that makes sense. I mean, for a season, I mean, it's like when we started, we had to sell stuff for a lot less than we wanted to, but once you establish a brand, you start getting feedback and you get a reputation, you start getting referrals. You can start crafting the business in a way that's more meets your initial goals. I remember
Exactly.
you. At first, I remember you. I use this analogy all the time about rowing the boat upstream. Um, you use that analogy with me, and you do that at first when you're kind of forging out on your own. You are rowing upstream, you're fighting against a lot of things, and you're trying to get to the other side. Um, and I probably forgot part of the metaphor, but yeah, it takes that work, and yeah, that makes sense. That seems like a good thing to tell people.
Well, what you're doing actually is this. I like this kind of hybrid. Like you can kind of piggyback off your own self that way. Because if you start, and a lot of practitioners will start with this too. They underprice their services. Like I've got things too. Like when I start a new venture, I'll price it really low, relatively because I want to get the traction going. So I
Yeah.
want to make the sales part easier because maybe I haven't figured out all the nuances of the conversion and education. Maybe I don't know how to find the attraction for all the people yet, but I do know I've got the thing and I've got a few people interested. So I'll have beta testers. I'll say, listen, this is an initial thing. It's going to be a lower price than it ever will be. And you're going to help me make you the best product possible for your situation. But then what happens is now that product part gets really strong and that starts giving the word of mouth. So that starts kind of filling the glass on attraction, right? And all of a sudden you got more people coming in going, hey, I want what they had. They sent me here. And now that's helping because now you got this pressure from the outside world going, what are you doing? I want to know. And that makes the sales part a lot easier because it's like, well, you came to me and this is what it is. And all of a sudden you're kind of upskilling yourself across the board, but you do it in stages. And I would imagine that's just like what you're talking about with the furniture is like it's a little bit lower priced at first, but you're getting the buzz going where now all of a sudden, Susie and Jeff and whoever have all talked to the same person. And now Kevin's calling you going, hey man, all my friends have these desks. I want to get something from you. And now you didn't have to run ads. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. 1 week. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know that I would have much to add to that, except that it's just true. Um,
But taking it in phases and understanding that helps with the subconscious part because when you're in the middle of it, it's like, oh my God, is this going to work?
yeah.
Or the slow months. We all know how the slow months go when you're an entrepreneur. And all of a sudden it's like
Yeah.
red lights flashing and you're like, oh my God, sell the whole place. I'm
Yeah.
closing it up. And then,
Catastrophizing. Yeah.
6 weeks later, you got a 6 month waiting list. It's
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and the thing about I mean, I would say practitioners in your field have an advantage over what I do because you can't really. I don't know how you commodify your business. Perhaps there's a way that that happens through maybe all practitioners are just doing it through insurance, but I mean, people need care, man. People, it's a mess out there, and um, I think intuitively people know that what they've previously done isn't working, and they're looking for answers. Um, and I see a real shift perceptually where the science is catching up, and it's no longer woo woo to do acupuncture or look at herbs as medicinal. And so the science is catching up, and people's perceptual field is expanding, and they're looking for more comprehensive and integrated answers to their health, both in their mind and their body, and seeing the connection between those two things. So I mean, I would say from my perception there's just absolute longevity in what you guys are doing. I mean, I wish I was in that field, because it's somewhat
It's
more
not too late.
insulated from but it's interesting, and people are fascinating, and the fact that you're able to provide something real and tangible and valuable to them is, I don't know, it's part of that process of you kind of reconvincing yourself about what it is that you're bringing to the world, and I think that's even part of managing the process of being a business owner, especially when you have those hard months. Is you need some way to remind yourself that what you're doing is valuable,
Yeah,
and that you're valuable. Um, but yeah.
I agree. So can we talk about the glass of water thing? Because this one stuck with
Oh.
me.
Um, well, I still use that. It's funny because you see sort of like in my world where I'm selling furniture from slices of reclaimed trees. I think there's something that initially prompts somebody to come in and to seek out our products. But you can see people sort of move through these different stages as they're experiencing what that process looks like. And a lot of times the second they walk in the door and they see slabs everywhere, and they have that experience of beauty, and they're like they have almost this primal desire to have what it is that you make. But the more you start to engage in the decision making process and the showing them and then giving them choices, it's like they moved from their sort of right hemispheric spatial sensing creative side of their brain to their fully operating in linear process efficiency, money. And you can kind of see this happening. And when I see that happening and I see people kind of getting into overwhelm or sort of that analysis paralysis, um, then, sometimes I'll take a glass of water or even just a glass and I'll sit it on the edge of the table where it's hanging over. And I'll just ask them how that makes them feel. And what I'm wanting them to do is understand that there's two parts of them that are at work here in making a decision, in processing the information, which they need to do, and they do need to make a decision. But I'm also trying to remind them of why they came to begin with, because it was never about the money. They already knew it was going to be expensive. Um, and but they get into this sort of, you can see it, the processing and you can feel the relationship getting, it feels constrained because you're dealing with a different person now, a person who's trying to make a decision and has all. So it's just an easy way, because they always go, "Well, it makes me uncomfortable," and I'll be like, "Well, why?" I'm like, "Your processing mind is telling you it's more on than off, and it's not going to fall off. So what are you going to do?" And they're always going to say, "Well, I'm going to push the glass in." And I'm like, okay, well, that's what I'm asking you to do right now, is to remember why you're here. You're going to buy this dining table, and yeah, it's going to be expensive, but you're going to spend years with your family and your friends and your loved ones building memories, and this is about more than a product. It's about the experience. It's about how it is we engage and live in the world. And you'll see them shift, and all of a sudden they're very open to making a decision. And sometimes they'll even laugh at themselves over this simple little thing. And I think it's just an easy mechanism to break the perceptual field that you see that's constraining them. And I think within any business, there's ways of finding a simple way to do that. And then sometimes there's all kinds of dynamics. In my case, I'll have a husband and a wife there, and you feel like you need to bring in a marriage counselor or something, the way they're treating each other. But the water thing is just a way to help people recognize what's going on. And I mean, that could be something you could do as a practitioner, where you recognize, listen, there's something that drove you here. This is just a simple way to remind you of what that is, which is you want to be a fully integrated and embodied person, mind, body, who is moving towards health. Um, Versus, really feel like in many cases like you're sort of succumbing to all of these forces that are at work on your body and your mind. And people don't want to live in chaos. They can't. They have to move. And they're either going to move into masking and drugs and digital, whatever, video games and screen time, or they can make some intentional moves, um, and give their attention to a different way of being. And that's going to take some work. So anyway, I mean, I think it's a simple thing that I think anybody could use, really, to just kind of break the ice if the conversation's getting tense.
Oh, I
I mean, it
really
would be
love that
like
because
if I turn this and you can see it visually. If I stick, here's all my books back here, but if I stick the glass on the edge of the, now it's making me uncomfortable, but you know,
yeah.
it's not a big, it's simple, and they chuckle usually because they see what they're doing. And I don't know that most people are aware of what's going on as they go through this process, of making a decision. And so if you help them recognize that and what originally drove them there to begin with, all of a sudden you'll see that ice break. They'll chuckle, and you've just made a connection because you actually helped a person see inside of themselves a little bit, which is part of what it means to be a practitioner. You're working with their body, but you're also working with their mind. And that's really what sales is that you're, as a practitioner, you have a broader way of seeing the person, seeing the human condition, and all these things are at play. And I think there's simple ways where you can really help people. I mean, you're trying to create a space for somebody, um, that they feel comfortable moving into, away from, the one that they're current in. Anyway, I've said enough about that, but
Well, I really love it. It always stuck with me when you talked to me about that because the rational part of the brain knows the cup's not going to fall, but the emotional part is like, I don't
it
like
doesn't
this.
care. It's going to win. Yeah,
Yeah. And so
yeah.
that's the lesson is like, it's okay to let your emotional brain also like make the decisions because it is anyway. It's just a matter of realizing what's going on, and you can kind of take that. You're helping somebody integrate basically their two sides, and you're undoing a lot of our cultural conditioning is about rationalism and quantities and being able to
Yeah.
defend your decisions ultimately in like an imagined court, where you could say, well, the reason I chose this table over the other is because X, Y, and Z. And really, most of that's just totally made up post rationalizations of the emotional decision you already made anyway. So it's like you can show people that stuff and it's amusing and we laugh because, like, oh my God, I am doing that. But at the same time, this is why I really like this approach to sales and also just being a human being is that every experience like that, it could be, oh, I'm taking somebody through the sales of this product, but really you're taking them into themselves and you're going, look at how you think. I do the same thing. Isn't it funny how we think? And they're learning about themselves. Just like you said, whether they buy a table or not, they're going to be different for having met you, which is what I'm getting at, having an impact on people. They may not come back and say it, but they're different just because
Yeah.
they met from this like one interaction.
Yeah.
And that's a different type of leadership, right? Because there's this other leadership, the authoritarian leadership, where it's like, do what I tell you, and you lead by making people feel small. But there's this other type of leadership where it's like decentralized and empowering, where you go, hey, I noticed this about my brain and everybody else so far I've talked to. Do you have the same thing? And now they've got one more thing that's gone from subconscious to conscious. They have more awareness around some facet of their human experience. And now that gives them more choice about how they want to operate in the world. You've empowered somebody.
Yeah.
So leadership skills, and this is what I mean about practitioners kind of tucking their tails and that, because it's like we want to hide from that conversation because we just don't want anybody to think we're arm twisting. But there's this
Yeah.
middle way where you're like, hey, check this out. Look, isn't this crazy how we think? Look at this. I mean, you're here for a reason. What are we doing? And now all of a sudden you've inspired something. And whether they buy it or not, it doesn't matter. I've had plenty of people that I didn't do a treatment plan with that I know for a fact had long-term takeaways that changed how they see the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's
And
really
I'm
what it's
fine with it.
about. I mean, you're offering a portion of care, but in reality, especially these days, I mean, I have friends who work in the kind of reductive talk therapy world, and during COVID, I mean, they're turning away 100 phone calls a week. People just want somebody to talk to, and so, I mean, that's another aspect of what you guys do. You're actually, and you're the doctor. There is no mediator. You don't have a nurse that talks for 45 minutes and they see a doctor for 30 seconds. So you guys actually have an advantage in that people actually, you do have an opportunity to build relationships, and I think that's valuable. And I don't know. I mean,
Well, one,
I mean, you guys just have such a cool opportunity. Again, I mean, in my world, I'm selling furniture, and you guys are selling health, and people are coming to you because they want to feel better. And but I think some of this, Jeremy, is from my vantage point when it comes to sales and all of the sort of perceptions about what that means, and you don't want to be that guy. And I think that's just where you go to school and you learn your craft, but they don't teach sales. They don't teach this stuff in colleges or university. I mean, these are really, but this is the glue, and you do have to learn to communicate with people. And I mean, it could be that, I mean, are that, I think probably what you're doing is incredibly valuable, and people need people who understand this and who are good at this and can help them learn how to be themselves so they feel authentic and yet not devalue their services or who they are. And so some of that's just personal work, where
a
they
lot of
they
them.
they need personal work, they need consulting, they need, and that's probably, you could look at that as marketing costs. Like if somebody in your industry could go to somebody, say like you or me or whoever, and I mean, you're spending, you're trying to spend money to improve your craft, and this is something that's not always easy for people to take on and learn, and it can be overwhelming. Um,
Well, I mean,
you know,
I've not always been good at this. This is a skill that is still
yeah,
developing. I mean, some people are really natural with that. I've had there are certain things I have natural advantages on in terms of not being so afraid of failing. So I'll try different things. I'll try different like sales techniques, or I've tried a lot of stuff. I've tried all kinds of internet things. Like I've done all kinds of stuff.
yeah,
But ultimately, you got to learn these skills, and communication's like a muscle, and you can strengthen it. You can get better at it. I think so far, if I'm going to be honest, I think that same subconscious irrationality is driving a lot of the like, oh, I don't like sales. It's just subconscious. We just don't like it because we don't feel powerful there. And I don't mean powerful like we take over and dominate. I just mean like empowered in those situations. And then we come up with a rationalization. We come up with a scapegoat. Oh, I don't want to be like a used car salesman and
Yeah.
whatever. And we default, but that's not actually true. It's more that we're just weak in that area and we don't like our weaknesses. We're sensitive around that. So once
Yeah.
we
Well,
can
that
get
you
this
just
kind
nailed it, I think, which is there's a certain, I mean, anytime you meet somebody new, I don't care where it is, there's sort of this threshold that you're both experiencing. I mean, that's why they always joke if you're a single guy and you want to meet a gal, take your, get a puppy and take him for a walk on the beach, or it's because, we do need, there's like this buffer zone that, often you have very sort of shallow, oh, hey, how's your day going? That kind of stuff, which drives me crazy, but it serves a purpose initially. Um, because people feel uncomfortable, especially these days where we have a digitized, virtualized experience of other humans. I see this, it's getting more and more difficult for, they're so used to experiencing the avatar person. And even in this case, we can at least see each other's face. I can see your nonverbal. I can hear your voice. But you get into these, Facebook and these places where people are doing nothing but typed interaction or whatever. I think it's having a deep effect on the human condition. And I know people who will they'll publicly say they're dealing with depression and they'll throw that up on Facebook. But then if you try to reach out with them, they they won't talk or they won't get together. And I think it's scary, and so it is when you're trying to get into sales and that you're trying to get into that mode. I think there's a certain vulnerability and it's not always easy to approach and cross over that threshold and feel comfortable and and engaging in that way, but it can be done. And you know I'm sure
well,
you're giving them ideas.
there's a lot to context too, like what you're talking about. I mean, I've had plenty of interactions that I couldn't have had early on in my career. I've had plenty of interactions where I've said things that there's no way I would have said them early on. And I'll give you an example, but I think a lot of it's like there's context of your setting and there's context of your tone and all the nonverbal stuff that you're talking about. Like basically, if you take communication and what would be transcribed, the exact words that you are speaking, everything else that wouldn't make the transcript can have a lot of power in how people receive the message, which
Yeah.
is what you're saying is like you strip all that out. Now you're on Facebook typing a sentence, and because you put a period at the end, it's now offensive and you should have just left it open. Like there's little
Yeah.
things that we're becoming kind of dialed in on. But basically, if you have the frame that everything's okay, you can kind of say what you want because people will be reassured and they'll feel accepted. I remember I had a new patient come in once and she was late and she hadn't done her paperwork and she was all over the place and she was here for, at the office for like, I don't know, shoulder pain, something orthopedic, but I could tell her affect was, she was everywhere. And, when she met me, I shook her hand slowly. I spoke to her slowly and I just let her know that like, you're here now. It's okay. I didn't have to say to her, you're here now, but I was just like, we're here. We're doing this. It's all right. And she's still kind of jumpy and all that. And I just sat down with her and I said, I mean, I just met this lady, 5 seconds ago. And I said, you seem overwhelmed. What's going on? And, she's like, I guess I am, but I couldn't have pulled that off fresh out of school. Just look at somebody and go, cause I didn't understand the energy behind it. I would have said it. It would have been offensive. You seem
Yeah.
overwhelmed. It would have been judgmental. But I've been working to cultivate a way to let my inside of feeling comfortable with all kinds of people and very much, that kind of Socratic thing of just like, well, let's see what's here. I haven't always been that good at communicating that, even though that's how I feel inside. So I've been now better at communicating that. People can feel it, and now they can
Yeah.
open up, and I can start a conversation with somebody, but it's also contextual. She came to my office for help. So it's not like I just saw her in the grocery store. But, those are things to play with too, is just saying things to strangers that are like two or
Yeah.
three levels of intimacy away from where they should be, but saying it in a tone where you can just have this kind of crazy deep interaction and then just go about your day. That's an interesting kind of game to play too. But,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
otherwise it's small talk. You got to fill it in with small talk and kind of chip your way through.
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to always have those awkward interactions, and some people have so much going on that you're not going to get in, and you can't win, right? I mean, a presidential landslide is 55%. Hopefully your close ratio is higher than that if you have people showing up at your office and wanting to engage in care, but what?
See, this is why we talk. These frames are hilarious. Yeah. But I
It's
mean, this is
like,
the same thing you're doing with the glass of water. You're just having a
yeah,
very pointed conversation, but you're doing it in a way that's non-threatening. And it's
yeah,
like, you're almost just curious and it's like amusing. It's like, look at us, look at our little foibles and our follies and all that. Like, what do you want
yeah,
to do? You know,
yeah,
why are you here? What do you want? Let's get to it.
yeah,
This also
exactly.
helps too from martial arts because there's this idea with the dojo. Um, cry in the dojo. It's an old, like a Japanese thing, like cry in the dojo, laugh on the battlefield. That's the idea. Like you come to this is a training environment. This is a place where you are going to fuck up. You are going to get hurt. You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be other people in here that are all in the same boat and they're all looking at you and you're all looking at each other. There's nowhere to
Yeah,
hide. And you start to get this weird feeling of like, okay, I get it. This is a vulnerable environment. And
yeah,
you're here to learn and mess up. But you do that enough so that when you're out of that environment where it like counts on the battlefield, that you can laugh and you've seen worse. You've been through worse, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So I've tried to set up a lot of my life where it's like I just kind of operate in a dojo setting for most people I come into contact with, where it's like, okay, you're going to cry here, you're going to mess up here, but there's such a thick layer of acceptance that that's part of the process that nothing should be catastrophic for you. Nothing should be an existential deal breaker in this environment. So that kind of tone I think helps because people want to grow and people want to learn and people want to learn about themselves. And I'm no different. But
yeah.
if you're in an environment that feels threatening, everything closes up,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Well, and I think, you guys have the opportunity in your field as practitioner. It's kind of like I have a friend who's a hairdresser, and I
Oh yeah,
mean, the
big
guy is
time.
really a psychologist. Like women are getting their hair cut and they tell him everything.
Yep.
And it doesn't hurt that he's a good looking, very laid back and articulate guy, but nonetheless, people want to make human connection, and I think in your field, if somebody's there, they want something, and maybe it's 3 sessions and then they need to reevaluate and they don't want to feel intimidated or pressured like they have to make an initial long-term decision. But I know that, like, I remember some things that you did that were kind of like the water glass thing for me. Like when you told me to sigh, I really want you to sigh, Blake. And of course, I'm a thinker, so I'm like, well, what do you mean? Why do you want me to sigh? And you explain the physiology of sighing and what that does to my body. And what you're immediately doing is it's the same thing as the water glass thing. You're creating a wider perceptual field, and you're the expert who recognizes that there's a lot more going on inside of somebody, and you're going to help them identify what those things are because people are in overwhelm. And something as simple as that, are you encouraging me to have rough play with my boys and to tickle them and explaining the role that tickling plays? I mean, I talk about that all the time. One of my favorite things with my 10-year-old, he asks me all the time, Dad, will you steamroll me? I mean, I'm 54, my shoulders are bad. I got things like, I mean, if I wrestle, I'm going to end up in the ER with a dislocated knee. But my kid just loves me to roll over the top of him, and he just, and so there's a physiology to that but there's also a connection and there's an intimacy and there's a lot going on in there. So I think, in your guys' field, you have somebody who wants care and you are the expert. You don't need to oversell that. And I think if you can learn some little crafts where you open up their perceptual field as you move into care, then the wallet's just going to open up because people want to feel better. And they do. People, you can't be in chaos that long. You have to move somewhere. And our propensity is to move towards order, and that's where you guys, are the experts, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we want a balance of complexity as humans. We don't want complexity to the point of chaos, like you said. We want to have some certainty that
Yeah,
I'm going to wake up tomorrow and have good mental functioning or whatever. Like you want, if you're having depression or headaches or whatever it is, you want to have some kind of certainty of how you're going to feel the next
yeah,
day, so you can make plans, so you can have a future. Because if you don't have any certainty about anything, that you can't make commitments with other people. Now there goes your relationships. You can't travel. You can't do anything because you're constantly having to play it by ear and all that. And people don't like that feel. They want to feel like they can project into the future, you know?
Well,
But at
and
the
I
same
think,
time, well, we don't want things also so certain that we never get any surprises or growth. You know, it's just a
yeah, well,
balance.
and I think you guys also, because you understand the body and the way things work. I mean, I read this book recently called Contact Modalities, which came from this book I read from this gal named D.W. Pasulka called American Cosmic, which is about uh, uh, unidentified aerial phenomenon and how there's this sort of growing religious response. And of course, the government's coming out and it's beginning to disclose, years and years of these. But anyway, the thing is there's she referred to a book in there called Contact Modalities, and basically what it is it's all the history of different sort of religious traditions, and it's really all about the mind body thing and how that creates and opens up a space of consciousness. Um, but you guys understand the body. I mean, I could even like just the tickling and stuff like that. That's a little bit of a kind of a hack because I'm
Yeah.
aware of my own body. It's like, okay, well, no, I need to steamroll my son, or not versus. And so I think you have the ability to help practitioners even when they leave, if they have a panic attack. It's like, okay, here's some things you might think about doing. Just sometimes just a simple moving into a mind body thing versus just processing everything in a cerebral fashion. It's like, because I remember when I first had the diagnosis with CPTSD, like I couldn't talk to my wife. My face would get numb. The second I tried to engage in language, which is very left hemisphere, it was like that was a trigger. But if we went on a walk, I could talk. It's like, what is going on? Like, why is it that I can take a walk and now I have like hemispheric balance or something, and I'm able to communicate with my wife and not get numb? And, so I think you guys have an opportunity as well to just, hey, during the week, if something, I mean, I don't know. You guys are the experts. And I think you can lean on that and recognize that people just don't know what's going on in their body. And you're there to teach them really about what's going on. And you're playing a role when they're there as a practitioner, but you're also their friend and their guide. And you want when they're not there to be healthy and beautiful as well, right? You know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that they say is like, you know, if you come for acupuncture once or twice a week, what are you doing with the rest of the hours? You know, I'm not there. So you're with your own self the whole rest of the week. So it's like, you got to start empowering people. Otherwise, they look, our culture is fine with like being dependent on pills and things like that and getting weaker over time and just pushing the complexity into the future. It's like, oh, I'll deal with that later. Just give me something to get through today or whatever.
Yeah.
And this isn't a value judgment. It's just there's a psychology there, and it's not only there, but I personally think it's been reinforced. I think it's been these kinds of messages have been purposefully put in there because it's good for business, for
Yeah.
very big industries. The more dependent you make your consumers, the more money you're gonna. I mean, this is not rocket science. Like, you know, we don't have to get our tinfoil hats on. It just seems like business, right? But at the end of the day, that's a short-term view on business. I don't want dependent patients. I want people that are independent, that are empowered, that are going around living their life and becoming an example of what it is that we can do, which then that's your product creating more attraction.
Yeah,
That's
and
what
when
I'm
you
looking.
do that, you're gonna have all their friends and their family,
Yeah.
when people see somebody who's doing better, and they're gonna talk about it, So I mean, that's your best advertising is your clients who are healing.
Yeah.
And
But doing a good job where they're not dependent long term. You know, that's the goal. We don't always get there. Some people they still need acupuncture every couple weeks or once a month or whatever. Like
yeah,
they need that. They've just got an advanced condition or what. I mean, it's medicine. You know, it's not. This isn't something where it's just like ones and zeros. Like you've got a lot of dynamic stuff
yeah,
going on.
yeah,
But you always, I mean, for me anyway, I always look at like kind of everything I'm doing as a bit of a crutch. And it's like, okay, how many of these crutches can I take away? Like we put them in, and then it's like, how many can I take away, and how fast can I do it, or how slowly do I have to do it so that you don't fall over? Like we need to get you as fully supported as we can. And there's, you know, there's some people, and it's not like a shame thing. Like, well, some people still need to come for treatment once a month, probably for the rest of their life to keep their autoimmune condition at bay or whatever it is. It's like you need a little help. That's okay. But I keep that, my devil in my shoulder is like, kick him out of the office. How fast can you get him out of here? And that's the one that I let that set the floor, set the basement of what I'm doing, because I want people to always be leaning more towards being empowered than not.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
that's,
I
I
mean,
mean,
some of it,
that's
I mean,
counter.
ongoing care, part of it too is you recognize the placebo effect or whatever. It's just the fact that they made a decision to come in to receive care is part of the healing. It's having
It's
that intentionality and acting out into that space. It's a win. It's kind of like, I don't remember who it was, whatever this, it's that like, just make your bed or clean your room. Like,
yeah.
it's like if you have a win and you make a step, another one's going to follow. And so some people, they're not ever going to want to exit care fully. Um, or,
Well, I mean, there is part of that, because the decision to go get care is based on the underlying belief that you're worth taking care of.
yeah,
And when you get somebody who, maybe hasn't been treated very nicely in their life, or treated like they're not worth much. I mean, there's a lot of abuse and things like that people deal with, even as small children or as adults, or they get in a relationship or whatever it is. And there's somebody who treats you like you're less than a human, or like you're just garbage. That gets in the subconscious. So now you got to overcome that to even like make a call to like try to improve something. You've got to. And I had one lady one time, I'll never forget this one, but I told her, I said, listen, she had a lot, just very complex condition going on. I said, you got a lot of stuff going on. If you really want to get better with this, here's what it looks like financially to get started. Here's the timeline. You got to take these herbs. I've got ways, I have methods to intervene with your body, to help you, right? Technically, it's going to have technical effects, but there's also this mental, psychological piece. And she looked at the whole treatment plan and she was like, man, I spend more than this on my dog, but I'm having a hard time. She goes, I need to think of myself as a dog, and I would treat myself better than I do now.
wow.
And I was like, that's profound. And actually, here, that's one case of somebody who actually did not go on to do the treatment plan.
Oh,
But I created that situation where she came to that realization because I was assertive and I presented the reality of it. She came to that conclusion herself, and she went, "Oh my, I don't even treat myself as well as I treat my dog." As far as I'm concerned, home run.
yeah,
Some whether she's going to see somebody else for help. I don't need to take every single case, but I put her on a trajectory where that's good luck for getting that. You know what I mean? That epiphany
yeah,
she had, it's either going to inspire her or haunt her for the rest of her time. And it's once she
yeah,
acts on it, she's going to go find somebody and she's going to put herself into it, and she's going to do great,
yeah,
you know? But we do weird stuff with the self-worth. And a lot of times, there's this correlation between the immune system and our personal boundaries. And this isn't 100%. And I want to talk about these things, but there's nuance. So I don't want somebody on social media yelling at me, or, well, go ahead and yell, whatever. But basically, like, there's a lot of folks that have complex chronic health conditions, autoimmune diseases, things like that have to do with the immune system and inflammation, that also have a history of poor boundaries, trauma, abuse, something like that. And one of the reasons, and this is where I think you'll like this because it's so connected, is that our immune system, the job of the immune system is to differentiate self from non-self. It has to go around and scour and eat pathogens and viruses and whatever else, and not eat your body.
yeah,
So to have a healthy immune response means having a very clear distinction between what's me, what's not me, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and then to be able to deal with it. And when people have had their interpersonal boundaries violated over and over and over again, their immunological boundary also starts to have a hard time. It's really quite interesting. So when you start working with people with these kinds of conditions, a lot of times if you start rebalancing their immune response, their inflammatory levels go down because their immune system's not attacking everything all the time. It's not overreacting internally, right? But then what
yeah,
happens is they'll start to step up, and externally they'll start to assert some stuff. And all of a sudden you got people who are now like not taking any shit. They won't be a welcome mat, whatever else. They got to go have difficult conversations. And I try to
yeah,
get ahead of this. I'll tell people, listen, before we even start with this, just be warned that you may find you quit your job when you're feeling better. This is like a place where you've been bullied at your workplace or they're taking advantage of you or whatever. You may decide you're not going to tolerate that anymore. And you may actually have the like guts behind you to make a move on that. And there's some correlate having to do with because we got your physiology more balanced. So just be ready for that, you know? And then lo and behold, be 3 months later and they're like, Jeremy, I quit my job. And I'm like, this is a win, you know? And you can kind of see it coming. And a lot of times what I really like with this is working online is that I don't even really tell that person directly. I'll just make a video that's part of what they go through in the program so they know it's something on their radar. So I can kind of I just pre warn everybody. I'm like, listen, you may wind up having difficult conversations if you feel like your I don't know, your spouse or your adult kids or whatever, if they're walking all over you and these kinds of things, your immune system's going to change, but likely your interpersonal boundaries will as well. Just be ready. And it's wild, the correlation. So the flip side of that though is that if you want to work with people with these kinds of conditions, you got to be ready for a lot of people that have had really like unpleasant events in their history, and they may have trouble with their self-worth. They may be used to being a welcome mat. And when you show up and you go, no, this is a place where we empower people, that actually freaks them out more than anything because they're used to not being empowered. And it sucks, but it's comfortable because it's familiar. And so they're coming for help. They want more, but it's like, well, this is what that looks like. And they're like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to be empowered. Now you got to have a whole other conversation.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, well, and I mean, we talked about this, the secondary gains, which is sometimes the sickness prevents you, provides you the space you should be taking for self care, but you may not be using it for self care, but you know,
Yep.
but yeah, yeah, that's tricky, but true. Um, I mean, we
The
had,
secondary gains are potent.
yeah,
Once you see that, it's like our whole psychology starts to open up a
yeah,
lot.
yeah, yeah, very true. The battle's
I look at
real.
that like a silver lining, basically. For anybody who doesn't understand secondary gains, it's the silver lining. You've got clouds, things aren't so great, but there's a silver lining. And then we see that and we go, ooh, I like that. And then somebody says, how about we get rid of these clouds and we'll have a nice sunny day? And you go, yeah, but if we do that, I don't get my silver lining. So how that would manifest is like, maybe maybe we hate our job and then we get mold exposure or something. And it's like, I'm exhausted. Everything hurts. My brain fog's going crazy. I actually had to quit my job or go on disability and I want to feel better. And then you say, okay, great. Let's get you feeling better. And then they're like, well, if I feel better, I'll have to go back to work and I hate my job. Right.
Yeah,
But this isn't a rational, this is all happening silently in the subconscious. So you get patients that drop off from care. They start feeling a little bit better and it spooks them and they disappear.
yeah,
And you go, okay, what's going on with that?
we're complicated, us people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There is a logic. There's an animal logic to it though that I think is pretty cool because we all have it. We can use our own selves. That's the cool thing, right? I can use my own self as kind of an internal laboratory to figure out what humans generally think like and how we feel because I am also a human. I can do that self study. And I think that's an empathy thing, right? To be able to like think of how others are feeling and run that software inside your own head.
yeah, yeah,
And then I see, oh, I've been doing secondary gains too. Here's where I do it. Here's where my self sabotage comes in. Here's what I'm getting out of this. You know, it's really
yeah. Well, and
interesting.
you're getting into deep philosophical issues about the way our culture works and all of its expectations, and time is money, and I mean, people just constantly feel guilty if they're not just beating themselves to death, grinding out every ounce of their chi or energy or whatever, just dump it into the machine who doesn't give a shit. But we're all sort of stuck in this cycle. So I mean, that's part of it too. It's like, I mean, who wouldn't want to retire at 30 and I mean, although sometimes the secondary gain when you have too much time just gives you the space to reinforce all your bad habits.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
there's something to be said for staying engaged with the world and doing, even if you're like retired or semi retired, still having outlets for growth and interaction and that kind
yeah,
of thing.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny. I fell into sales right out of University of Washington. Um, I was working part time in the electronics industry, and at part time in fully commissioned sales, I was making more money than anybody I knew who had graduated, who were my friends in like 2 years. And that was very eye opening. And so I realized that they don't teach this stuff in school. I'm not aware of. Is there anything where you guys get your education or anything where they talk about more like how to build a business, how to talk to people, how to do sales? But I found that if the skills that you learn, if you learn to engage with people, um, call it sales or whatever, is that's really a commodity and it's not taught anywhere. Um, so I ended up in that field for 20 years uh, without ever setting out to be there. And, you know, uh, but, it's fun. It really is. It's fun. People are interesting and learning to navigate all of those idiosyncrasies with a person and being able to kind of tap into that arena it's kind of fun and it feels really good when in the end sometimes the tough ones are the most rewarding because when they finally come around and you win their trust and you become perhaps the greatest catalyst for change that they're after in their life. But sometimes you do have to work for it. And I can see the value of what you're doing if this is the sort of thing that you're trying to help people with, because it's not really something that's taught. And it's the number one reason I think that small businesses fail. Um,
Oh yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
because yeah,
you've got the first few things, which is, I mean, I know woodworkers who do way better woodworking than we do, who left their engineering job and tried to forge out into entrepreneurial land, and they couldn't get a single customer. So, I mean, that's real.
yep.
Um, you know, but I also have met a lot of creative types who just don't know how to talk to people and are so intimidated by that interaction that they would never even venture out into trying to do that. Besides maybe an Etsy shop or something that
Yeah.
where you make finished products and kind of sell them, that way. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling.
Well, you're kind of bringing up the same types of points that I usually lean on. Is that you've got this innate skill or this ability to do the thing, to create the art or deliver the treatment or whatever, but you have to unlock that with all those meta skills. These are the business skills, and ultimately, I'd say business skills and sales skills are culminations of leadership skills, and leadership skills are going to come from being comfortable with yourself. So a lot of what you're talking about, how like, oh, you do these sales and you're kind of naturally good at it. I would offer, I mean, I didn't know you back then, but I would offer that the reason why it's fun for you to navigate these processes with people and kind of go through and explore the idiosyncrasies is because you're comfortable inside your own skin and your own head with your own idiosyncrasies. And you view your own self as something you can explore and understand with a little bit of awe and not so much like intimidation and shame and that kind of thing. Because you're not locking yourself down when you're
I
being
wish that
introverted.
was true. I don't know. I don't know that it is.
I think it is.
I mean, there are certain domains, I think. You know what I mean? Like we all have kind of places where we feel very competent and very confident. Uh, but
I think there's too many things you've brought up over the years that somebody who's afraid to look inside would never have brought up. Like you're exploring your own mind.
well, that's for sure. Yes, that is true. Well, thank you for noticing that. I guess.
Yeah, but I mean that gives you the ability to go with other people too and say, well, I mean, this glass is half off the table. What are we doing here? What
Yeah,
who are you inside? And you can navigate that with whatever level of comfort you can navigate your own internals. And that most likely is what's set you up for success with that kind of skill set, is that you're not afraid to go in, so it's easier to go out too.
yeah. Well, and I think this goes back to the point I made earlier when we were just talking about how um, your practitioners have to do personal work too. I mean, they're that feeling of when they're approaching sales, that's the glass on the edge of the table.
Yeah,
It's
that's
making
it.
them uncomfortable. Um, and so the tendency is to want to fix that or to back away because it feels, scary. Um, maybe the metaphor didn't play out exactly accurately there, but I think what you're saying, I think, is true, and you do need to be confident of your competencies and you need to be confident that you have a valuable service, which includes you and your perceptual field, because you have a wider knowledge base. And so that gets back to the tickling or those sort of things, where I think that you guys as protect that could be a way to push in and lean in a very subtle way. That's sales. You didn't think of it like that, but you're opening my perceptual field and you're communicating value across. So now I'm going to want to jump in further. Oh, tell me more things I can do, because most people just sort of plod along and they don't recognize, these things, or the value of laughter. Like, what does laughter do to your physiology? Hey man, if you're feeling depressed, I'll tell you what, go to YouTube and find a comedian, and whatever it is, um, and get a good, I mean, crying gut laugh. It's gonna, and so people can kind of form their own sort of habit or ritual base to deal with some of these things on the everyday level. And if you're the one that's helping them see the way to move their whole life into a different way of seeing and being, that's sales. Really, any value you're bringing to the table, what I think people are afraid of is the covert and the very obnoxious. um, but I don't think it needs to be that way at all. People are there, they want your services, and relax. And as you relax, you're going to see these little windows open where you're able to shine some light through and teach them a little bit of something. And that's going to build trust. You're going to find that you're making a connection with people. And, um, it's always hard because when they teach sales training, it's like, okay, well, you have the qualifying process. You need to ask questions. And you're just like, you're just like, and you see people who can't not do that, like they're hyper vigilant about the process, and that's the kind of person we none of us want to interact with. Where you feel like all you're doing is being massaged into this corner where
Yep.
like a gun is being held to you, and you now have to make a decision, or it just feels super awkward, and there's that kind of silence,
Yeah.
where,
Oh yeah.
and of course they say, he who speaks first loses. It's stuff like that too that's so cliche, where you're just like, okay, yeah, I just said that, and oh wow, this is very awkward now. uh,
Yep. I've tried all of it. I've sat with all that tension, and I think a lot of here's what I'll tell you. I think a lot of that advice is good advice. It's just contextual because it's also
yeah,
bad advice. Like if you say the price and shut up, and that's sales training. What that's doing is that's medicating the person who says the price and then immediately starts trying to justify it or whatever and distracting the person. Like the nervous energy, blah blah blah. It's just you don't have to be quiet and be weird. Just be quiet and be normal. Just let them think. It doesn't have to be this battle of wills of like I
yeah,
speak first, I lose, because that is what they teach. I've done it a fair number of times and it's always weird. But if you
yeah,
come at it with a different tone of like, oh, here's the answer to your question, here's how much it is, or whatever, and then you do be quiet, you're not being quiet so you can win something. You're being quiet to just give them a minute. Just give them a minute. Don't be so
yeah,
nervous,
yeah,
you know? And what you're talking about with relaxing, I agree with that. And I also think that our culture has an issue with this relax thing because a lot of times relax just means like limp. But relax doesn't mean faint. Relax just means like be there, have your integrity and be supple. It's not stiff and it's not like there's nothing there. It's somewhere in
yeah.
between.
It's
And
more like rest. It's like, you're, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're confident in what you've done at this point. I don't know. Like, it's funny. They say he who speaks first loses, but in reality, what most people do when there's that discomfort is they speak too much into it, or they can't stand it, and then that's where it starts to feel even worse. Where you realize that you're just, I don't know, like like you've got this gun clip, and okay, now I've unloaded everything, um, and well, hopefully I got him. There's that sort of awkward feeling where you don't want to do that, where it's just you have this whole thing that you go through and then you stop, and then you're just, so it's like, yeah, I mean, them engaging in the process, and you do need to ask questions, and but yeah,
yeah, I
it's
mean there's
tricky.
there's definitely stages of growth with that. It's just like anything else. You can be awkward at first learning anything, learning how to tango dance or something. You're going to be awkward and weird. You're kind of like, you're technically doing the steps, but like, nobody wants to see that. And then you get better and you get more relaxed and more natural with things. I think sales and communication has a similar learning arc. One of the things that I started to train myself on very early in my practice was I started to hunt down relief. Anytime I felt a feeling of relief, I would flag that. And I was like, relief from what? And then I was like, where's this tension coming from? And what's this anxiety about? So, like, for example, very, very early on, if a new patient came in and they had had acupuncture before, I would feel a sense of relief. And I started to become tuned into that. And I was like, why does that make me comfortable compared to what? I was uncomfortable before. What kind of stuff am I bringing into every new patient interaction? And this was in the Midwest, in like 2009, and acupuncture wasn't really very well known then. So it wasn't very often I got people. Most people that came to see me, it was their first time. But I would get people and they say, "Oh yeah, I've had acupuncture before." And I was like, "Oh, good." And what was that? So then I had to dig in and go, okay, that relief is coming from now I feel like I don't have to explain to them how this works. Now I feel like I don't have to give them a treatment plan because they already know how things work. And I realized that the tension I was feeling was because I wasn't very good at explaining that stuff or creating a treatment plan. I wasn't confident in leading them through that process. So if I felt like some other acupuncturist already had, I was like, oh, the weight's been taken off that. I can just relax and enjoy the ride. But that's the opposite of being a leader and going, I mean, now I'm like, I don't care if you've had it before. I don't care if you just came out of somebody else's office. I've got to set the frame for you and I've got to take charge of how we're mapping this out and be assertive, not aggressive, but assertive and say, like, listen, here's the parameters. Here's how often you have to come. Here's what it costs, and have those conversations. I did develop that skill amongst many things that I would find myself relieved about. And so that's like, for me, that became a red flag. Like if I feel relief, I gotta look into that because there's a skill
Yeah.
gap underneath
Well, now
that's giving me
I mean, I
attention.
think you might be a little bit unusual in that you felt empowered by that, and then
Yeah.
you're taking that leadership hat and you're saying, okay, well, why am I uncomfortable? But that's real. I mean, it is. I can see a lot of people get paralyzed. They don't feel empowered when because there is an advantage when somebody's had care before. That's part of that perceptual field you have where like you have no idea what somebody's bringing in their perception. Do they have a family member who's valued from acupuncture? Do they have anything? Where are they? And so that's real, and that can feel paralyzing. In my world, like that, where somebody reaches out. I don't know if you guys get phone calls or emails or how you normally begin to engage conversation. I know in my world, I mean that's real, and but I guess I would push back on that a little bit and say that if you don't have any context for their perceptual field and what they're bringing in relationship to the type of care that herbs and an acupuncture or whatever the practice is brings, then they probably feel that too. Um, so sometimes whether it was when I was back in electronics, like most guys would avoid the phones, or they would avoid the guy who's unloading this'll date me, the VCR or the DVD player from their car, bringing it in to be serviced. For me, that I was on the phone. I was engaging with that person.
Yes.
Um, in my world with the furniture, usually people are reaching out in advance, either phone. So I do usually try to get some sort of precursory things out of the way, um, that that make them more comfortable when they come in and make me more comfortable so that we can just jump into the fun stuff right away.
Right.
And so sometimes that means, at least in my case, because pricing can be all over the place with my business. I mean, I usually ask them some questions. We try to determine some general dimensions. We build out some context and vision for what what the product's going to be, and I try to give them a ballpark price range. Um, so when they come in, I know at least they know what to expect in price. Because like sometimes when you're going through the process, and all the while you're going, oh man, are they just going to shit themselves when I tell them what this is going to cost? Like that's uncomfortable, and that affects my ability to interact in a way that's at rest with the client. If I already know that they don't have a problem spending the money, This is worse now because you have all this imported stuff that's coming in. I mean, so I have no idea. I mean, what they're expecting, a $750 dining table they can find at Fred Meyer. Um, and so, I mean, I do think you can pre-qualify if you have the ability to engage, whether it's on the phone or, I mean, I don't know if you guys have, like, I know if you go to establish new care at any practitioner, you usually have, I just did this yesterday with my daughter who was going to a naturopath. I mean, there was like a 6-page questionnaire,
Yep.
and my daughter
Yeah.
was like, what? I need to tell my doctor when the first day was of my last period. Why do I have to do that, Dad? Like, and I'm explaining it, or whatever, and they're trying to, build a contextualized understanding of all the things that are sort of present in your, So I don't know if you guys have questionnaires or if you have
Well,
ways that you can engage preliminarily that would make you, the practitioner, a little bit comfortable, knowing that you've already made some progress.
right.
Um,
That's important. I guess a lot of this heavy lifting's been done by another practitioner. But instead of just being relieved and coasting on that, I would follow that feeling and go, okay, there's a skill I'm missing. And maybe this skill, one of them might be pre qualifying people. Right now, putting in new systems in place where I can do that. Just like you're talking about having the conversation about pricing kind of roughly on the phone before somebody comes in, because different sales schools of thought will talk about like the front half and back half of the sale, right? Like
yeah,
the front half is when everything's all good and it's all just everybody's thinking about what it's going to be, and then you tell them the price, and now that's the back half of the sale is where all the objections come in and everything. But if you get the pricing up front, at least the ballpark out of the way, the whole sale process is back half where all the real questions actually get asked, which is nice because then you don't have to do the thing where you tell them the price and then hold your breath or mute the phone or whatever all the weird stuff is. So these kinds of things, what I'm kind of getting at is like there's a lot of skills like that, and the ability to move around the systems and these kinds of things that you have in your sales process and beforehand and upstream. But a lot of times, if we don't even know that those skills exist,
yeah. Well, I mean, you have to learn that skill because not everybody's going to have previously had care. I
exactly.
guess I guess it's just how do you build the mechanism to, you're going to get the person who just walks in off the street and sees the sign, or you're going to get the person who shows up. But I just wonder if in the process from moving somebody from interested in care to in care, um, if there is a way to build out mechanisms
Oh yeah.
that are helpful, whether it's an email questionnaire prior to coming in, or I don't know. I mean, you guys, your business better
Oh yeah.
than I do, but
Like
yeah,
my online stuff with Modern Vitality, for somebody to start the program with me, there's like 100 question application they've got to fill out. It's very, very thorough. So it's not only like health history and all the relevant stuff like that, but it also has to do with their psychology and how they're looking at their problem and like all these. I want to know everything about somebody, and
yeah,
pricing is part of that. The price is one piece, but there's a lot of filtering I do that's essentially automated because I've built
yeah.
systems around it.
But
And then you also have,
how many people do you know who have something like that?
well, I'm working on training more of them. I mean, that's what I'm
Yeah,
doing at Damn Good Doctors is that we're building these systems.
got it.
A lot of practitioners have some of that, but it's not. I call them fractal systems because basically every part of what you're doing contains elements of the whole thing you're building. And
Yes,
it's really
exactly.
crazy when you start looking at that. It's really crazy. And the
Yeah,
other thing with fractals is they can scale without losing fidelity. So, there's a practitioner that's in my group and she's been at it for a few years now. She's built the systems like just like I taught her. She kind of took the framework and just went for it. And then she's put she's fleshed out the bones in her own way. And it's been really amazing to watch all this happen. And she's starting to blow up now. And she just had 52 new applications come in for her group in a 48-hour period. And she's
wow.
like, there's no way I could have handled 50 new patients in a brick and mortar clinic without it breaking. And I would offer too, there's no way you could handle 52 new people coming into most online telehealth things where you're doing Zoom calls without it breaking. But we've built everything to where she can handle that influx, and it's only going to make everything better. It's fractal, and that's
Yeah,
the thing. Like practitioners have no idea what they're sitting on in terms of being able to leverage their knowledge and their skills. We live in a very, very special time right now. Very, very special
yeah,
time. It's kind of like if you could make tables without having to make the tables. Like if you could make a table once and then they would just like appear in 50 people's houses.
yeah. That would be nice.
Pretty amazing. So yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time. I'll just kind of put it there. Because so much of our work is heavy lifting is on education and connection. And yeah, there's herbs and things like that. But a lot of it is if you really want to inspire somebody, you've got to engage with them with their mind and with their spirit. And you can do that in ways that scale really well. One of the things you brought up earlier was connection with other people and having a connection with like a practitioner, because we don't have a nurse in front of us or whatever else, so we are the face of our treatment and we
Yeah.
talk to our people and all that. But what's really cool is leveraging technology without losing humanity. And one of the ways to do this is to having groups and having communities. So, I mean, I've had really just amazing and remarkable experiences working with people trying to get better from complex chronic illnesses all over the world. And I put them in a group together. Now they're interacting, they're chatting with each other outside of the group, they're connecting. I've had people like order herbs from my herb shop and have it sent to somebody else in the group because they're like, oh, I know she's out, I'm going to take care of her, I want to get this. It's kind of like being at a pub and being like, oh, the next pint's on me. Like that
Yeah.
kind of, there's so much stuff we can do when we use the technology in a more human way.
Well, that's good because you have platforms that like Substack and some of these where, like, I don't know, it's easy for a large mass of people to kind of gravitate around one thinker, but they're so limited in the way that people can interact. And
Yeah.
that's great. I didn't know that. I probably should be in that modern vitality community. I
Oh, it's
probably didn't
wild.
want to answer the 100 questions, but that's good. It can be lonely. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, people want to connect. I mean, they'll connect on forums about how to set up your stereo speaker system. People will make friends that way. Like, we'll organize around any kind of topic. It's just
Yeah,
really interesting when you get a pool of people who are generally kind of introspective and like. I mean, I had this even in the acupuncture clinic. There were plenty of folks that came in, especially retired, and they love telling me how they hate people. Oh, I'm an introvert. I hate people. I never go anywhere. I don't like talking to people and all this kind of thing. And yet, at the end
they
of the treatment, I can't get them out of the office because they're
yeah they're
yucking
sitting
it
there
up with
talking
some
to you
other
the whole
patient,
time. Yeah,
me or other patients coming through, and they just get talking. And I mean, it was the worst was if there was tea. If I had tea out at the front desk, I'd be giving people tea before they left. And now it's like everybody's standing there drinking tea and laughing and talking about whatever. All these introverted people who hate everybody are just yucking it up, having a good time in the office. And I was like, there's something here, you know,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
something here. You just got to get around the right people in the right context. And all of a
yeah.
sudden connection sounds more
Yeah.
nice
Well, and
than
I think
like,
often
hey,
as somebody who is an introvert, which is really defined by energy, like if I'm in a large group, and I mentioned this to you before, like, hey, let's get caught up because this is much more comfortable to me than if you put me like if I'm in a room where there's a lot of people, I'm on the edge. I'm always on the edge. I mean, people are fascinating to me, but you put me in a bunch of them where they're all talking, my whole body literally starts everything that's going on it starts going on inside of me as an introvert. And so yeah, I mean, and I think that's another way to look at sales too. Like I enjoy that process, but I am an introvert. And so most people think you have to be an extrovert to be
yeah,
good at sales, but we all want human connection. We all need human connection. And honestly, if you have a potential client sitting in front of you in a one-on-one situation, like that's ideal for an introvert, even if you're so like, I don't know, I think that's that's it's good to recognize if you're an introvert. But yeah, I mean, that's funny. I hate people. They probably, I don't think they do.
yeah. I get the same thing too. A lot of folks are like night owls, stay up very late, and they're healing. So I'll try to tell them like, listen, your circadian rhythm's really important, and this and that. And they're like, yeah, I'm just a night owl. I can't change that. I'm going to be up until 2 a.m. And now we find out the secondary gain is that their family, they love their family, but their family's loud and playing video games and whatever else. And their opportunity to stay up later than everybody else is their quiet time. That's their
Yeah,
And so that's the secondary gain. It's like, okay, you've trashed your circadian rhythm, but you're getting out of that, you're getting your needs met of being able to like be awake and just have some quiet time. So now it's like, okay, we talk about that and I go, okay, maybe I'm not actually a night owl. maybe I'm just a little bit more introverted and I need some reset time. It's like, okay, now we can find things where you create situations in your day where you go take a little bit of a siesta away from all the chaos and activity of your loved ones, you know, so you don't have to resent them, but you build that structure in so you can still go to bed by like 11 and let your body actually heal. Because it's crazy. Maybe you don't know this stuff, but like we do have a circadian rhythm where each unit of time is not interchangeable. So the quality of sleep you're going to get if you sleep from like midnight to 8 a.m. is different than 11 to 7, even though it's the same 8 hours. But because of the way that the time is going, you need to be in bed by 11 if possible, just because there's a whole clock to it. I mean, there's this whole thing like Eastern medicine's got all this stuff mapped out really
Well, and I'm
well, and the
sure too.
science
I mean,
is
some of that is. I mean, I loved. I wish the title were different. That book you gave me on fibromyalgia, the fibromyalgia Bible.
yeah,
I,
fascinating.
I mean, you changed. I mean, you. I wouldn't say you were totally responsible. It was more like one more thing contributing to a whole change in perceiving everything as an integrated experience where
Yeah.
everything connects, versus this sort of idea of linear progression. It's like, no, I have all these things coming into my field of awareness. I'm sick for a reason, and I've actually learned more in my body becoming sick or hurting. That's an opportunity. It's not a failure, and that's a different way of looking at things. But I remember in that book the idea that what we should be eating locally and seasonally, because whatever you want to call it, God or the universe is smart and provides what is natural and for our care in the environment where we are. And we're in this world where, I mean, when I was younger, we ate seasonally. I mean, you couldn't go buy all these fruits and vegetables year round from the supermarket. You ate what was grown locally and what was seasonal. And like, I don't know, there's something to that that's cool. And I think that it's probably I would guess the same thing with circadian rhythms, which is that our body is really wired where we should our sleep and wake cycles likely should be more tied to sunset and sunrise.
Yeah.
And like a bear, I know you do this. I always crack up when you get a little fatter in the winter and your hair grows out
Thanks for noticing.
and you're hibernating. The problem is if I do that, I'll put on 100 pounds and never lose it. Um,
Yeah, well, I've noticed, since you hit 40, it's harder to play the bear in the winter game and then come out in the summertime. It's a whole different. It's a little bit of a back. We're back to swimming upstream or rowing the boat upstream.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we do have those seasonal. I mean, there's cycles everywhere, right? And some of the people I work with, they're very smart practitioners, and it's really interesting to hear different people's perspectives on this stuff. But when you start looking at even some of the scientific debates of like light, is it a photon or is it a wave? Is it a particle or is it a wave? And it's like it's kind of
Well, it's
both, you
both.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And why are we having this binary conversation? But when you start getting that wave understanding, because you and I are made of particles and waves as well. We're
Well, and all the
nouns and
space
we're
between
verbs.
them.
Yeah. So the whole thing's vibrating, and you've got all this stuff we exist on. I was just talking to one of my kids. We took a little walk in the woods, and they get existential, because they're always like wanting to know where the universe came from. Ultimately, we wind up having these metaphysical conversations.
Wow. How old are
And
your kids now?
like my daughter's 9. She was the one bringing it up the other day. My oldest is about to be 11. But yeah, it's really interesting. They want to know all this stuff, and I
Well,
mean,
that's
honestly, I
cool.
remember I remember being a kid and thinking these thoughts about how time might be a circle, like a giant circle. And I remember being like 4, and it blew my mind. I mean, I remember the bathroom of the house we were living in, and where I was just like in there, I don't know, brushing my teeth or whatever, and thinking about that and going, whoa, and just being staggered by infinity. So I'm kind of like, okay, guys, let's throw down, let's talk about it. But she wants to know things like, okay, so where did if we're made of stardust, where did the stars come from? And I'm like, this is a great question. Here's what we think. Right? They think about the Big Bang. We talk about different religious ideas, different creation stories, scientific theories, all this stuff. And then I told my daughter, I said, when I think about this stuff, one of the things that kind of hit me was, if everything's a cycle, if we have a daily cycle where the sun goes up and down, and we have a monthly cycle where the moon gets big and goes away, and we have seasonal cycles, annual cycles, and all these kinds of things. Maybe the expanding universe is a cycle as well. And maybe it did a big bang and it's getting really big and going far and far away. And maybe it hits a certain point where now it starts to come back together and kind of coalesce into smallness and nothingness again. And maybe that's just the ride we're all on forever, you know? And she was like strangely satisfied with that answer. Like it did something
At
to her.
9?
Yeah, her 9-year-old brain, she's like, I could see that. You know, that makes sense. And I was like, but don't worry about being crushed to death because the sun will burn out long before that, sweetie. You know, don't worry. She's strangely comforted, you know?
At
But
9? I'm astounded.
oh yeah. Oh, they're smart kids, man. They're smart kids. So all that's to say is that like I think even the biggest things we can think of also wave. I think the universe is expanding and probably will get small again. It's gonna wax and wane just like the moon, just like our days, everything. So when you start looking at that and going, okay, you know, how come I don't feel good? And it's like, well, how misaligned are you to all the rhythms going on? You know, there's a certain point where we can't get too far off the rhythms or we just be dead. You know, there's some incompatibility that you just can't make up for. But as long as you're kind of on the right track, I think we can approach some sense of wellness. You know, there's something between dead and like extremely full of vitality. There's a pretty good amount of space we can navigate. And getting people to that
Yeah,
upper third or upper 20% of that, I mean, that's like you got somebody's whole life back. So yeah, sometimes it does mean going to bed before 11.
yeah,
But then it's like now we're reverse engineering that. Like, I know you should do that, but why don't you? And they're like, well, because I'm a night owl. That's a story you told yourself. What's really going on? Well, I live with a bunch of teenagers and they're loud all day and I like it quiet. Ah, now we got something. So this
yeah,
just means you have to have a conversation. You got to set new boundaries. You got to go, hey guys, have your video games, do your thing, go wild. But from 3 to 5 p.m., that's my special quiet time where I go to this room, take a walk, whatever, and everybody just fucking leaves me alone because I've got to heal from mold illness or fibromyalgia or whatever. And that's part of
yeah,
it. Because if they do that, then they'll go to bed and then they can get better. It's like everything's this, you know what I'm saying? It's a web, it's a multi causal
yeah. Well,
puzzle.
you know, and it's interesting because these days, if you start taking a hard look at, it's like the elimination diet. It's like I'm sick and I don't know why. Okay, well, let's get rid of everything and let's eat three things and let's see if those. But you know, if you look at the number of environmental factors, you just brought up mold. I mean, I read stuff about 5G and electromagnetic field and fire retardants in my chairs and my carpets. It's almost like animism in a sense. In the
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the phenomena are different. You know, it's no longer my ancestors speaking to me or the spirit in the bush that I'm trying to appease. It's like I have all these things talking to me and I'm trying to get healthy. And I mean, it doesn't take but a second to get out there and there's conspiracy theories or truths. I mean, who knows whether they're about all these things. I mean, my daughter follows this gal on Facebook who's constantly talking about solar flares, and it's like I
Yeah.
see that, and so I think, oh, there's something. Is that something? And then, but then there's a apprehension I have to even dive into that knowledge base because all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, here's another thing. Like, how do you deal with
Well,
this? Okay, well, I need to move into the
yeah.
woods in a log cabin with nothing unnatural. So it's like I sort of view this. This goes back to my days in high end audio video. I sort of view all that stuff as what they would call the noise floor.
Mhm.
So in the high end audio video world, we had what were called enthusiasts or audiophiles, and the measure of experience comes from live performance. So they go to a symphony or they go to a live performance, and they experience that. It's a direct experience. There's the musician, there's the music. There's nothing mediated, or there's
Mhm.
less mediating that experience. And they want to have that all the time, but they can't. There's not a show every night, and they can't, you know. So what do? Well, you know, they want to build a quality sound system that gets as close as possible to that direct experience. And the amount of money that they will spend trying to get there is insane. Um, And the difference between a cheap amplifier and an expensive one is all in that story arc, which is that the manufacturer is building components that have much lower noise floors because you're putting all these things into the box, and
Yep.
every one of these has a tolerance, and cheap crap makes more noise. And then this is the same thing as with like inflammation in the body, or like we're eating bad foods, like it's noise, all of this, and we don't know what's going on and we're overwhelmed, and we want to get back to where we actually can have a direct experience with our family or ourself. um,
Yeah.
and
Where is
so in
this
their world,
shrieking coming from?
I mean,
Yeah.
I would sell $10,000 pair of speaker wires all the time, like rolling my eyes, going, "Oh, and I would sit there and try to have, I would want to validate that in my own experience. Like I tried to convert myself to a high end enthusiast many times. I'd go to the symphony with the store manager and he's weeping, and I'm like, you know, uh, um, and it's like but the goal with all of the money spent is to reduce the noise floor, and that their dream is to sit there with their glass of wine and their cheese and have what amounts to a direct experience. And so all of that and all the money they spent, and the the uh, the sort of placebo part of that. I mean, if people spend that kind of money, they're going to experience what they are expecting to experience because they spent the money to do it. But it seems to me to be the same kind of thing with health. We have all these things creating noise, and part of what you guys do in the body is reduce that noise and the inflammation and all those things that are flaring up and cause somebody to be aware of their body in a negative way, or what they perceive to be negative because it hurts or it's chronic and it doesn't go away, and it's becoming their whole perceptual field.
Yep.
And I just, again, I think you guys have tremendous opportunity to shift the perspective too, even about suffering. I mean, that's just that's part of the gig. We all suffer. It's not going to go away. The truth is what is, like, I remember reading that book, Our Body Keeps the Score. It's like,
Yeah.
there's a reason, and we're going to work on reducing the number of inputs that are causing that. And but reconciling suffering is not always easy for people. um,
Well, I think that noise floor is a really good analogy of what's going on. And I would say that the symptoms and the suffering and the pain around that, it's a feature, not a bug. It's meant to get your attention.
yeah,
Just like when a baby cries, babies crying is like one of the worst sounds in the world. It's so grating on our nervous system. That's by design. It's
yeah,
supposed to grab our attention.
you're not
Yeah.
supposed to ignore it. Yeah,
Yeah, if babies cried and it just sounded like la la la, you just let them cry. They'd still have a dirty diaper, they'd be hungry, they'd be
yeah,
cold, whatever. But because it's so abrasive, it grabs your attention and there's a part of us that gets activated and goes, I need to change some manner of this situation. I need to make some kind of positive change. Right? And it's the same thing with the symptoms. It's the internal baby crying of the nervous system and whatever else is communicating field wise to your experience. Getting that noise to go down, you can take your stereo and you can just unplug it and all the noise is gone, but you don't get to play the music. So it's the same kind of thing with a lot of the suppressive therapies and painkillers and all that. I think that's what people are noticing, is that the reductionist machine has doubled down on its own set of beliefs, and it's just creating basically the numbness. But that also means you get loss of function and loss of fidelity and loss of enjoyment.
yeah.
Sure, the noise is gone, but at what cost? So now we have to look at these things that may require more
Well, it doesn't
committed
just numb the symptoms; it
solutions.
numbs everything. Joy,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You feel dead. You
Yeah.
don't. It doesn't. If it usually, I mean, my experience, because with CPTSD, they wanted to put me on antidepressants, and I'm like, well, I'm not depressed yet. Um, and I could feel it working, but I could feel it working in all kinds of places I didn't want it to be working. And I, but yeah,
Well,
but
there's
it,
a
it
lot to
has
be
its
said
place
for
perhaps, but
there's a lot to be said for the environment and
yeah,
the inputs that we have. And kind of to your point about making handmade bespoke furniture out of these beautiful one of a kind trees and having this experience, and then looking around at the market and going, okay, well, there's you know basically a lot of cheap furniture that's just being kind of passed off as checking the box of furniture. I was just talking to Marissa about this, and we've got this thing with like particle board, and how IKEA and so many of these things, everything's made out of like particle board with veneers on it. And it's just such a metaphor for so much of our society is just like this thing that's not built to last whatsoever. It just kind of like checks the box. It's cheap, you know. And I told her, I was like, the particle board furniture is it's kind of like the furniture equivalent of like you will eat the bugs. It's like you will live with the particle board stuff that keeps breaking. You will eat the food that's barely food, or it's going to be made in some kind of laboratory. It's just like this whole it takes the self-respect out of existing. And then when you've got everything getting priced up so high that all anybody can afford is the particle board version of existence, that's when you've basically like extracted so much soul out of the human race. It just takes the joy out of things. It's just not a nice way to go. So,
Yeah.
to your point, like buying a one of a kind table that's made out of actual wood that will last you years and probably becomes an heirloom, it's like taking a stand against that degradation of everything around us.
Yeah.
It's important. And I know not everybody can afford like all these things all the time. So you pick your battles. You have to pick your battles. That's just the way it goes. But at least you're picking your battles and not just being swept away by the current of the way our society is trying to cheapen and degrade like every single thing. So sometimes that means we go to a thrift store, go to an antique store, go find the table that's actually made out of wood, or a bed frame that's actually made out of wood, or you're on like Facebook Marketplace or something, because the otherwise you're going to get something that, I know I said this buy once cry once thing, but it's like I would rather buy one table one time than have to get a new one every 2 years because half of it just got chipped off because of life, because I have a kid who dropped a plate on it and half the table's just some broken piece of particle board, but you
Yeah.
got to buy it 5 times. Or if you move, these things aren't
Yeah.
built to be moved.
Well,
You
and in
go to,
our world, like, sometimes people's life situation changes. Like we've had people buy big dining tables, and then the kids were gone, and they downsized, and you have a 40-inch by 8-foot slab of wood, you can repurpose that. So we make a breakfast
oh
table, a
yeah,
desk, and two benches.
yeah,
Because it can be, it still has structural integrity because it's not veneer on particle board. But but the same thing with the direct and the indirect experiences in there as well, which I think is what you're talking about. But there's, in my industry at least, like we got involved at the early adopter phase where nobody
yeah,
was doing it and it was kind of growing. Now it's been commodified and it's really a battle because the market creates an attraction to an aesthetic, but it's not a direct experience. You're buying a piece of junk, like it's, I don't know. I can get into this diatribe about the capitalists. I've seen it happen so many times where you have the early adopter phase, you have something beautiful and very high quality in the way it's manufactured, and then it gets commoditized.
mhm,
And now we have stuff being shipped in from all over the world. And literally, you can go to Fred Meyer and buy an $800 live edge dining table. I can't even do the legs for that. And so it creates a problem. And at first, people who can afford it and who value beauty and want a direct experience with it. But the second the price begins to erode in the marketplace, it shifts the perceptual field. And where everything's going up in price, we're having to like reduce our prices, yet our material costs are going up. And
yep,
so it's a challenge. So for those of you in your practice, I would say you're in a good field because people are always going to need care. We're facing the reality of shifts in market and the commoditization of beauty. I mean, Costco sells a $1,200 live edge dining table with chairs. It's veneer on particle board. It looks like a slice of like neon bacon, but it's so ugly. Um, but you know, cheap, man. People have to have their cheap stuff, and
yeah,
I just don't think they know that they're being duped. Um, and so, um, the old world where you shop in the town that you're in and everybody is, the internet has just kind of changed that a lot. And I don't know. I'm resistant in trying to adopt to. I mean, because there's ways we could morph the business and sell cheaper products. I get emails all the time from companies in Indonesia and China and South America that want to. I mean, I can buy a whole container with totally finished products for less than I can even buy the material, and they're totally done. It's like, well,
Mhm.
I didn't set out to open a furniture store. Like, I want to make beautiful stuff. I want to engage directly with a customer with something that we've crafted and build value in the ownership experience. But man, the capitalist machine just kind of has its way, and
Yeah, things have
it
become
grinds
commoditized.
up small businesses like us all the time. And you guys are in a field where everybody's always going to want. I think your market is growing. um, I really, the way things are going, I think people are more looking for alternative methods, and they're not buying into the old. Um, they're not necessarily. Um, I think people are open to a perceptual shift, and I think you guys are at an amazing place and time where you're going to bring a tremendous value to the way that the world needs to shift its thinking to more. I mean, in the integral view, or the integration and the connection between all things, that's something that needs to move outside of your office as a practitioner, and just the way we approach the natural world or anything. And I wish
Everywhere.
everybody would make more conscientious buying decisions instead of just buying cheap shit, and then giving them the illusion that because they own that, they're like this person up here that they're trying to compare themselves to. It's like, no, you know,
Well,
go to the
check this
thrift
out.
store. What's that?
Here's a cultural disruptor is a belief that when you're 18 you need to leave the house or you're a loser,
Yeah,
right? And another one is like multi-generational family living together with parents, kids, grandparents, all cohabitating. If you can create a cultural belief that when you're 18 you need to move out, otherwise you're a loser, then now you have a whole fleet every year of 18-year-olds that have to furnish their apartment.
yeah,
You've just taken every single thing that was in that house with mom and dad, and now you've had to buy it again. And of course, you got to buy the cheap shit version because you're 18, right? So now, if you think about that, somebody like you with what, how many dozens of kids do you have? Every single one of them has to go out and
yeah,
consume,
yeah,
consume, consume. Whereas if there was a cultural norm of living together, as long as it's reasonable and makes sense and all that, without all the shame and all the weird story around it, all of a sudden now you don't have to have every member of your family has their own table. You could actually just have like a good table that you all sit at together, right? Because as it
yeah,
stands now, everybody's at their particle board table by themselves, watching their phone. We're
yeah.
not eating together, so
Yeah.
there's a whole
Well,
value system.
it's hard to shift that perception. I mean, that's why I think I'd always encourage people to have their kids travel, especially to countries that where they can see poverty, they can smell it and taste it. Um, I faced this when I was younger and just had two kids instead of seven, and I had gone to Thailand and then had gone to China. And I realized when I got back, I had this idea about what it meant to be a successful father. And there was like, there definitely is a perceptual field. Now there's opportunity here too, and often people who travel from other countries see this. I knew a gentleman from Thailand named Pan, who moved here and had nothing. And I mean, they rented an apartment and slept on the floor. They didn't have to have nice beds. They didn't have to have
Yeah.
anything. He was a tailor at the Bon Marché, and eventually he became the tailor manager. But then they ended up buying the house they were living in, and they still didn't have beds. And then they eventually
Mhm.
tore the house down and they built a 12-unit apartment building on there. Now the guy has a huge house on like Mercer Island and lives in a very affluent. But they didn't have to have all the stuff, and they all
Yeah.
lived together. I'm for this. Can you talk to my kids? Like I love the Indian model of, like when you're raising kids, you're the householder,
Yeah.
but when you hit a certain age, your oldest son becomes the householder. He's now responsible providing. And you get to go into the woods and be a monk for a while. Like I am dying to do that, man. The my I read this book called Courting the Wild Twin, where it's like this idea, this myth where when you're born, your wild twin's kind of thrown out the window. Um, and it's this idea of being domesticated and over domesticated, and how there's this always this part of you that's out there in the wild that at some point you're going to have to go out and find, or you're going to go nuts.
Yeah. It
And
does make sense.
I think that's sort of what the midlife crisis is. Like, I'm ready for my kid to pay the bills, and I want to, heck, I want to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. I want to do something hard. Um, Um, I don't want to do the get in the car and go to work every day hard. I'm burned out, but the system isn't really set up that way. Um, and by the time sometimes you recognize these things, you're kind of sucked into that vortex, and you've made yourself a slave. When you should be like you. Do you still make your kids their clothes? Um, your wife?
No, you know what? We're very good with like thrift stores and stuff though. The
Yeah,
um the whole like supply chain waste model, Marissa's really on point with this because she's like this the waste is astounding. And if you're going to
yeah.
bring lives into the world, that we're going to be consuming, we're going to be using things. There's always stuff you need, but we really try to limit our impact on like the waste stream if possible. So, I mean, she loves like thrift stores and that kind of thing, and just finding stuff that already was created. All that once you watch, what was that? There's a documentary. I think it's called like The Hidden Cost or something. There's a documentary about clothing and slow fashion and fast fashion. And when you see the films of like all these fabrics being wasted, or like the leather dyes just being washed into the river from in India or wherever they're doing this work, it makes you not want to buy so many things.
Yeah, well, it's hard to live out those ideals, and that's the other thing I think where community comes into play. If you had localized community in that sense, where not everybody had to buy the lawnmower, buy the shovel, buy the, it's like there's
Yeah,
so much duplication of resources, and
that's it.
and it kind of creates, it's like the snowball rolling downhill and grabbing more shit. And you end up in that snowball that's just rolling downhill and gaining momentum. It's tough to break that cycle once you're hooked to the garbage foods. And I mean, your kids don't know where food comes from. And I mean, our microwave broke a while ago, and we had a major family drama over that, because I'm like, no, we're not buying another microwave.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
blessing. Yeah, get it out.
well, we have one now because my wife got one for like $10 at the store to buy water, but it's back in our pantry. It's not out in the. But it's amazing how just not having a microwave shifted perception. Because when you go to the store, you now no longer can buy anything that is cooked in a microwave. You actually have to cook and prepare food.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
wonderful constraint. Embrace it.
yeah. And so it's like that, it's like we need to build a different snowball and get some momentum rolling downhill, and I don't know, it's like, but it's tough. It's tough. It's tough. It's very difficult to do it by yourself because it's
Yeah.
expensive.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, anyway.
Well, that's something I've considered here with even my neighbors, is to have a tool library, like a neighborhood tool library, where you just keep a little thing on the internet, like a little spreadsheet or whatever, of who's got what. Because if I've already got a power washer and a leaf blower and a circular saw and whatever else, why should my neighbor have to, like, think of every neighbor now has a
Because
leaf
he doesn't
blower.
want to talk to you, and we don't know our neighbors. I
Right.
mean,
But this is
yeah,
a good excuse to get to know them, like, hey, we got a tool library. And now all of a sudden you're friends and laughing and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ways that I think people have come up with that are really creative to do this kind of thing. But I mean, yeah, just imagine your life if you didn't have to buy, like you said, the duplication of resources. If you're even just your street, if you guys all shared the same leaf blower or whatever it is, I mean, there you go. There's your real food budget for a little while that you didn't have to spend on some machine that
Breaks
you
any
that breaks anyway. Yeah,
that
exactly.
I don't know how to
So
fix, then I have to buy a new one.
yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff like that. It's really
Yeah,
astounding. And when we look at quality of life, like for me, okay, so this podcast is ultimately about like health practitioners, and I know
yeah.
that different kinds of people listen to this. It's not just like acupuncturists or whatever, but ultimately we're in the business of helping to restore somebody's quality of life. Because if somebody comes in and says, oh, Jeremy, I want you to help me with my headaches or my fibromyalgia, or I'm infertile or whatever it is, if you do the thing where you ask them why a bunch of times, it's going to come down to, like, they just want a higher quality of life. So we can help get health conditions out of the way of quality of life. But like, where else is quality of life? That's really what I'm going to be a servant to, is helping people get a higher quality of life. It just happens I'm channeling most of my efforts through like their health. But I mean, so many of these cultural things influence the health. So if we're talking about, I don't know my neighbors, well, what would your quality of life be like if you did? What if you had some social interaction with the people who live close to you? What if you actually got to meet people who weren't exactly like you and you got to bond and connect that way? What would that be like? Because they look at all these cultures that are like longevity cultures, they go, oh, it's this island off the coast of Italy, or it's this, this little part of Greece or whatever. And
Yeah.
and they look at those and go, oh, we need to come up with the Mediterranean diet
Yeah,
because these
exactly.
people
Yeah.
live a long time, right? These blue zones and this kind of thing. But it's not just the food they're eating, because the Mediterranean diet is just an excuse for people to think they need to drink a bucket of wine every night. That's not what it is. You're not by yourself drinking wine, watching, late night talk shows. You're having a glass of wine with your neighbors walking around on cobblestone streets and smelling the fresh air. And you know who's who. Like there's so many parts of that culture that you can encapsulate by just reducing it down to like antioxidants or something like that. So a lot of these places, these blue zone places, people walk a lot and they know who's in their community and they're talking to each other. And like
Yeah.
that's the secret sauce for the health and longevity.
Yeah. Yeah. It really
You can't get
is.
that in a pill. So yeah,
Yeah.
things like that, like a tool library, it's really just an excuse. It's like, sure, we can save some money, but it's an excuse to start talking to the people around you, and it's the same thing that was happening in my office. It was people would come in and they're introverts, don't want to talk to anybody. And now all of a sudden can't get them to leave. And there's a cup of tea in their hand, and they're laughing and having a good time. It's like, that there's something there, and that kind of makes you think like, okay, maybe my square footage should be like 30% acupuncture, 70% cafe. Maybe I screwed something up with my business plan. Maybe I should have more of a
Well,
hangout
that's an
lounge
out of
area.
box way of thinking it as well. Yeah.
Because like your wood shop, you're selling tables and benches and all that. But when I came in there, I could have stayed in there for hours and just smelled. I mean, the sawdust smell and all that kind of stuff, and just looking at the grain of the wood, having these little interesting conversations, meeting the other people that come through. Like, what's your deal? What are you doing? That's an interesting place. And like you said, that kind of ambiance when somebody first walks in, it does something. And there's something there.
There can be. Yes. That makes me think of, yeah, I mean, we've tried a number of times to kind of do more of a co working where you get some sort of anchor businesses you know, I mean, I don't know how that works in the field that you're in, but yeah, I mean, you could do a coffee shop. I mean, it's the duplication of resources thing again. There's different
Yeah.
kinds of health practitioners. Um, I don't know. I haven't looked, but I don't really see places where you see like different practitioners who are helping offset the cost of a space and reducing some of the pressure. And
Oh yeah. Yeah, that
uh,
happens. So some of them,
does
I
it?
know this will sound weird to say, but one of the resources would be like the receptionist or the front desk staff. Like there could
Yeah,
be kind of an incubator space or a clinic where it's multidisciplinary, where everybody who's there pays a portion of the receptionist or front desk. So you're sharing that resource in that way. So you've got somebody handling the phone and whatever else, but you don't have to pay a full salary, especially while your practice is growing. There's this kind of incubator space idea.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm doing this. Do you know the Y Combinator? Are you familiar with this?
Mm-mm.
It's like a tech thing. So a lot of these companies like Airbnb came up through Y Combinator. It was started by, I believe, some of the people who were working on LinkedIn and different things like that a while ago. It's a place for like venture capitalists to invest in up and coming, like the next disruptor. But these kinds of spaces provide a way for tech companies to get started, get a foothold. They can talk to each other. They've got mentorship from other people who have already done it. I look at that and go, okay, that's a great model. How can we apply that to like health practitioners? You get the camaraderie, you get some mentorship and all that, and you're doing the shared resource thing yet again. I mean, I'm doing this even like with the Doctors Club folks. We look at online stuff and go, okay, how can we pool our collective energy to not be so limited by like the Instagram algorithm, right? These kinds of questions. How could we work on network effects to cross promote if we each had a YouTube channel, right? How would this work so that we can start to? You don't have to be alone, like fighting these algorithms, trying to get heard in a noisy world. There's a lot of really cool things like that. Yeah, when you
Well,
start
you
thinking
could have
about
an
it.
on. I mean, you're talking about an online platform
Yeah.
where there's a number of practitioners who, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's very. I mean, I know that it's expensive to. It's the duplication of resources. The thing. If everybody has their own website, but there's a synergy as well that could. that that has potential as well. Even if you had different sorts of practitioners on there, um, I mean, you could have life coaches or other. I mean, heck, in our ecotherapy. I mean, there's a lot of different um, sort of health modalities out there that are not regulated mainstream modalities that could all benefit from having some sort of synergy of relationship.
Right.
Um,
So I mean, anyway, it's kind of one of
yeah,
those things. It's an interesting thought experiment, and then you can come up with cool ideas because you're just trying to use nonlinear network effects to make things easier for everybody involved,
yeah,
not harder, you know. But
yeah,
you're right. It's the duplication of resources. That's one of the things that even with time, time is like our most important resource. You never get it back. Like you can make more money, but you can't make the hours come back. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, instead of reinventing the wheel, can we stand on each other's shoulders? Is there a problem you've already solved? This is okay. So this is one of the reasons, like, I really like looking outside my domain, which is why I'm talking to you on a health practitioner podcast, right? Like, why? Well, because it doesn't matter about your domain. You're not a health practitioner, but there's a lot of stuff that you've figured out or that you've solved or that you have experience on that we can condense that. And now somebody could listen to this for 2 hours and not have to spend 2 decades in sales to understand some of what you understand. You know what I mean? Like we are
yeah,
sharing resources here. We're condensing that. We're accelerating the conclusions and accelerating the epiphanies so that people don't have to spend literally decades to have a certain perspective, point of view, skill set, whatever. And I really like that because time's the most important resource. So why don't we, instead of duplicating that, right? Why don't we just leverage what other people, even in other fields, have figured out? Because there's a lot of stuff from different domains that they've solved problems that your domain may be struggling with, and it's like, dude, just look over there. There's some kind of analogy you could make or some kind of way you could extract and leverage some advanced understandings. This is one of the things actually with my field that I get a little bit I get on a soapbox about, because acupuncturists and herbalists, a lot of us, and I know I fall into this myself too, but we tend to be like do it yourself type people because we like making things. So if you said, "Hey Jeremy, I just found this new herbal lip balm or whatever. I love it." There's the herbalist in me is like, "Oh, I want to try to make one of those." Like, I won't just buy it like you did. I want to like deconstruct it and get into it and tweak the recipe and like whatever.
yeah,
Some of that's fun, but some of that is just reinforcing the habit of like reinventing the wheel because there's somebody else, another herbalist who already did all this work. Just buy it from them. Like there's so many different things we could apply our energy towards that haven't been done. Why do we scramble around and just constantly reinvent the wheel? And that's one of the like little bones I have to pick with my profession in general. As part of our nature is that we like to tinker with stuff, but we need to learn how to set that aside. And if something's already done and working pretty well, to just like use that and build on top of it instead of having to reinvent it all the time.
yeah. That's true. Well, and I could see in that idea of the online community, or the sharing of tools. I mean, it could be too that there is somebody who maybe in your arena who's a practitioner, but because of some of their personal health issues, maybe they can't engage face to face with clients anymore, but they still
Yeah.
love herbs. Maybe they can grow organic herbs and you can buy their lip balm. Um,
Yeah.
and they can have a presence on this sort of e-commerce slash clinical whatever hub. Um,
That's it. It just
you
takes
know,
creative thinking and communication,
yeah,
which is like, it's just a different skill set than technicals.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It's an exciting time. So I'm happy to be here on this planet at this
Well,
time.
I'm
It's
glad. I'm
like,
glad you're
let's
excited.
push back against particle board culture and get creative and be nonlinear and use our networks. And, commoditization happens, but I think there's ways around it. I think there are. And you just got to understand your niche vertical and what kinds of people you serve and what their values actually are. Like for you, you're not the particle board consumer. You're never going to live in that area of the niche of people who need furniture.
Yeah,
You're just not.
this is true. This is true.